Chapter 997. Under the boundless night sky. Below the small city, two people and one wolf slowly walk toward an even more vast and unknown destination under the countless gazes of shock, confusion, humiliation, disbelief, and other complicated gazes on the city gate and wall behind them. You won again. Turning his head to look behind him, Lan Shah roared and rushed out of the crowd toward him, but was stopped by Bamitu in the blink of an eye. Retracting his gaze, he raised his head and said to Tang Yin, who was wiping his sweat. Of course, although he was in a sorry state now, showing an external temperament of a lucky escape, Tang Yin's expression was still very firm. He waved his hand magnanimously. It's within my expectations. Think about it. If you didn't let me go just now, then you would definitely die here. But if you let me go, they would still have a chance to save you. Hee, such a simple choice, even a fool wouldn't know what to choose. Pause for a while. He grinned and smiled proudly. To put it bluntly, this is a matter of face. At that time, Elder Ba said to let you stay and let me go, which was already a step back. In this case, if I refused, it would mean that I didn't give him face, and the consequences would be unpredictable. But if I didn't refuse, I would lose face, and my safety wouldn't be guaranteed. So, pay attention. Here comes the turning point. Think about what I said at that time. Taking a deep breath, he said seriously, if I'm safe, then you're safe. If I die, I'll die in front of you. Look, what's domineering? I admire myself. This way, I didn't give in, and I also catered to Elder Ba's desire to protect you, giving them a way out. Isn't this a happy ending for everyone? Ha, 2F King Smart. Oh. Holding his lower abdomen, Tang Yin looked at the back of Lan Shah's head in confusion and depression with an innocent face. We were talking nicely. Why did you hit me? Could it be that you were touched just now? Touched? Hee, I don't understand what you're talking about. Sneering, Lan Shah replied expressionlessly. Haha, admit it honestly. Don't forget that I'm an assassin. What disguise can I not see through? Lan Shah smiled, as if he didn't want to talk about this meaningless topic. He lowered his head to look at the slowly moving giant wolf and asked, since you're already out, shouldn't you be running as fast as you can and as far as you can? You're not good at changing the topic. All right, since you're so arrogant, I'm not afraid to tell you. Sitting upright and still, Tang Yin looked rather wretched and proud. He laughed and said, have you ever seen a dog chasing a man? When encountering a slobbering dog, if a person calmly walked past it or simply stopped and squatted down, the dog would show you some respect. But once you turn around and run away, your whole body exudes an aura that says I'm weak or I'm scared. It would be strange if that vicious dog doesn't chase after you and bite you. Do you understand now? That's why we have to walk slowly now and chat casually. Let's let their imaginations run wild and let them be suspicious and fearful. Understood. Lan Shah simply nodded, then turned his head to look and said indifferently, but the city wall has disappeared from our sight. In other words, they can't see us now. Is there a need to do this? Damn. Why didn't you say so earlier? Giddy, quick. Run quickly, you bastard, behind the city wall. Andre, who had barely calmed down, looked at Lan Shah, who disappeared into the night. He pushed away the two masters beside him and walked to Bamitu with a gloomy face. He bowed, looked up, and said in a stiff tone, Elder Ba, I need an explanation. Bamitu didn't care about Andre's offense. He narrowed his eyes and looked in the direction where the two people and the wolf disappeared. He said indifferently, you know this brand kid. Do you think you can save Lan Shah without getting hurt from him? Andre couldn't help but be silent. After a moment, he gritted his teeth and said, at least there's a chance. Maybe, but I think there's a higher chance if I follow them. What do you think, Captain Andre? Andre was stunned when he heard this. He immediately understood that he had lost his mind. He wasn't the only one who cared about Lan Shah's safety. The strongest person in the northern wilderness in front of him was undoubtedly the same. Therefore, it was naturally the best choice for Bamitu to follow them. He bowed solemnly again. We'll leave everything to Elder Ba. Just tell us what you need us to do. Bamitu waved his hand to seal off the news. As for the rest, although this assassination was unexpected and Twain was lucky enough to succeed. Humph. At this point, Bamudu seemed to have thought of something and snorted coldly. Then, with a gloomy face, he continued, "But with that girl Lan Shah's scheming, she should have already made arrangements for this. Just do as she says. Remember, before we come back, the army can't act rashly. The position of the commander can't be changed. No one can. Understand?" Hearing these words, which seemed to have a hidden meaning, Andre's heart skipped a beat. He instantly thought of someone who had just arrived in the city. He nodded solemnly and said, "Understood. Then that's it. By the way, Tang, and said that there was an army on our side attacking the Gray Coat army. Which army is it?" Prince Tiu's army." Tiu, it's him again." Bamata's old eyes narrowed. A cold light flashed in them. He had decided on something. He waved his hand coldly. "Send the order. Before we come back, make that army avoid the Gray Coat army's territory." After he finished speaking, he turned around and looked somewhere in the east. His long robe fluttered, and he casually pressed his palm down. "This is Andre was stunned. Before he could understand the meaning of this action, Bamata's figure had already soared into the sky and disappeared into the night. East City District, Aristocrat's Manor. Come, uncle, I'll toast you again." Tiu, whose face was flushed red and whose breath reeked of alcohol, raised his wine cup while shaking it. He slurred as he continued to urge Lu Cheng to drink. "You can't drink anymore, Tiu. You're already drunk." Shaking his head, Yuan Fong, who was also in a tipsy state, quickly reached out to dissuade him. "I'm not drunk. I'm very sober. Uncle, today's opportunity is really rare. I have to toast you again. Drink, drink, drink." Tiu pushed away Yuan Fong's arm as he spoke inexplicably. He tilted his head back and downed the wine in his cup. As the saying went, those who could drink were not afraid of those who could drink, but those who were looking to get drunk. Tiu's current state was obviously looking to get drunk. Seeing this, Yuan Fong could only shake his head and smile bitterly. He had no choice but to raise his wine cup and drink with him again. But before the cup touched his lips, suddenly, creak, creak. In a short moment, the table was shaking, the wine jug was shaking, the ground was shaking, and the entire loft began to sway slightly. It was as if doomsday was coming in an instant. Thunder and heavy pressure rapidly gathered above his head. What is going on? Half of his brain was numbed by the wine. After being stunned for a moment, Yuan Fong did not immediately realize that danger was approaching and quickly dodge. Instead, he looked around with a blank face. As expected, I was discovered. In contrast to the shocked and confused Yuan Fong, Tiu, who was swaying left and right with a drunk face, instantly sat up straight and muttered to himself in a low voice. It seemed that he was not surprised by the current situation at all. In fact, it was indeed so. Tiu did not think that his plan was very thorough. It was nothing more than using Bamata's addiction to drinking as a breakthrough point. Every night, he would invite him to drink and get him away from Lan Shah's side, giving the brand assassin a chance to strike. It had to be said that this plan was really simple and crude, and it relied heavily on luck. There was only hope of success under a coincidence of chance. Of course, Tiu did not have a better choice now. Not to mention the possibility of success, even if it was 1% or 1 in 10,000, he was willing to take a gamble. Fate often did not like to play by the rules. In the end, he actually succeeded. Previously in the City Lord's mansion, if Bamata did not come over to drink and had been guarding Lan Shah's side all the time, no matter how exquisite Tang Yin's hiding skills were, he would not have been able to successfully get close to Lan Shah's side, let alone kidnap him. Such an outcome could only be said to be God's will, and there was nothing he could do. Of course, Old Man Ba hadn't lived for nothing after all these years. Although he didn't have conclusive evidence, it wasn't difficult for him to see the flaws in this not-so-meticulous plan when he saw the cause and effect. Hence, revenge came after the fact. However, Tiu was not afraid of this. On the contrary, he was laughing, slapping the table and leaning back, laughing very happily. Ha ha! Huh. Of course, this did not mean that Tiu was crazy although there was no doubt that he was crazy now. Tu had reason to be happy. The reason was very simple. Bamata did not come over to seek confirmation, but directly took revenge. What did this mean? It meant that there was indeed a problem on Lan Shah's side. Haha, of course. Tu would laugh when his long-cherished wish came true. At this time, Yuan Fong could not laugh anymore. Like a heavy mountain, he was pressed to the ground like a fish that had been caught out of the water. All the bones in his body cracked, and he could not move at all. In an instant, his brain, which had experienced countless painful reactions, felt like it was about to explode. At the same time, he had to open his mouth wide, gasping for air with all his might, and spitting out large mouthfuls of blood and pieces of internal organs. The next moment, boom, waves of air rushed to the sky, and dust flew everywhere, mixed with broken stones and with shavings that shot in all directions. This rather exquisite attic suddenly collapsed, turning into a pile of rubbish ruins in an instant. The unforeseen event happened too suddenly, and there was no warning at all. Hence, when the flying smoke and dust was mostly blown away by the biting cold night wind, the urgent shouts of the guards could be heard from far and near. At this time, with a bang, broken wood flew everywhere, and Tiu, whose body and face were covered in blood, staggered up from the ruins like a ghost. He looked around, scratched his messy hair, and did not pay attention to the warning sounds coming from all directions. Instead, he staggered a few steps, lowered his head, and looked around, as if he was looking for something. Of course, he was not looking for Yuan Fong's corpse. Most of the thunder and heavy pressure, just now, was aimed at Yuan Fong, and the latter could not have left any trace in this world now. With both knees on the ground, Tiu shakily reached out his hand to pick up a broken piece of a wine jar from the ruins. Looking at the few remaining drops of wine on it, Tiu's expression looked like he was crying and laughing at the same time, and he whimpered, "Uncle Yuan Fong, I've let you down." Whether or not this plan succeeded, whether or not Lan Shah was killed, Tiu was very clear that he would not die, because he was the Royal Highness, the first in line of succession in name. So even if Lan Shah did not die, if there was to be a reckoning, only the Empress could give the order to sentence him. And if Lan Shah had been assassinated, then he wouldn't have died, because the Empress only had 2 children, and the Northern Wilderness royal family only had 2 heirs. No matter how big a mistake he made, he would not be sentenced to death. Of course, Bamata's anger had to be vented. So, Tiu asked Yuan Fong to drink with him. Not because Tiu wanted this uncle who had always taken care of him to die, but because he had no other choice. Bamata's anger would not be vented on him, and similarly, he would not vent it on any random cat or dog. That would be meaningless. So even if it was to give the greatest warning, Bamata had to kill someone important enough to show Tiu. So, things were simple. Who was the most important person beside Tiu? Naturally, it was Lieutenant Yuan Fong, who had always been by Tiu's side, and who had always been by his side. Raising his hand, the broken pieces of the wine jar slowly moved in front of Tiu. A few drops of wine slanted down and landed on the ground of the ruins, instantly disappearing. "Uncle, I respect you. Don't blame me, really don't blame me. You know, I have no choice, I never had a choice." "Huff, Uncle, you have always helped me, always stood by my side. You should be able to understand why I'm doing this. I'm just a dog now. Everyone looks down on me. Everyone wants to step on me. I have to sit on the throne. I can't fail. Otherwise, I'll die without a burial place. Uncle, you should be able to understand why I'm saying this. Anyway, I feel that doing this is worth it." He lowered his head and murmured, "Uncle Yuan Fong, what do you think?" Well, no matter what Uncle Yuan Fong, who had already turned into smoke, thought, no one replied to Tiu. There must be something fishy about this. So let's shift our focus and put it on the more interesting kidnappers. When the hustle and bustle of the night gradually calmed down, the faint light in the eastern sky finally began to show its existence. Dawn was coming. Ha! Ha! Lan Shah, who was sitting on the back of the Mercedes-Benz Wolf, was constantly blowing warm air into the lens in his hand. Then he took a soft cloth and wiped it while shaking his head and complaining, "Your invention is flawed. Once you encounter the morning fog, or When you enter a warm room with a burning stove, the lens is always foggy. It is very troublesome to wipe it back and forth. You don't know how to be content. It is good enough that you can restore your vision. It is just a little troublesome. What is there to complain about? Tang Yin, who was sitting behind him, twitched his mouth. He didn't think much of it. Of course, the main reason was that he didn't know how to solve this problem. Although there were fog-proof glasses in the modern world, Tang Yin didn't think he could replicate the manufacturing process. Lan Sha was a little regretful when he heard this. It is a flaw after all. The northern wilderness has already started mass-producing this thing. It would be better if it could be solved. Unfortunately, all right, I have an elder who also can't see clearly. But why is it that when I tried on many glasses for him, it didn't work? Tang Yin's mouth twitched, and he was speechless. Because he is not nearsighted, he is presbyopic. Touch the lens in your hand. Isn't it a little concave? If you want to make glasses that your elder can see, you must use a convex lens. It's that simple. It's that simple. But then again, you're using my product to mass produce and sell for money. Shouldn't you pay me some copyright or something? Of course I should. After a pause, he was overjoyed. Huh. As long as you admit it, I will give you an address. When you have time, send someone to send the money over. He shook his head. This matter is not under my control. The money from selling the glasses has been put into the national treasury. Now the northern wilderness tribes are under my mother's control. So if you want money, you can talk to my mother directly. Coincidentally, she also wants to talk to you about the matter of you destroying the imperial city when you left. Damn, you can't be like this. All right, the atmosphere was really harmonious. If someone who didn't know the inside story saw this scene, they would definitely not think that these two people were kidnappers and hostages. But if one thought about it carefully, this was normal. Tang Yin and Lan Sha were already familiar with each other. In addition, although they were on opposite sides, they knew that the other party would not harm them. So, naturally, the estrangement of meeting after a long time was quickly dispelled. They were like old friends who could talk about anything. It seemed to be very harmonious. Of course, there were still problems to be faced. For now, there were two main problems. First, the impact of Lan Sha's departure on the barbarian army and the entire war situation. Second, where should Tang Yin take Lan Sha now? After all, he was a man. In the midst of chatting, Tang Yin first asked Lan Sha's question, which was the first question. He also expressed his concern for the other party. Of course, this was not because he was apologetic, nor was it because he was gloating. Although the two of them were not life and death enemies, it was a fact that they were on different sides. Tang Yin did not think that it was wrong to kidnap Lan Sha and leave. He was just thinking about the other party as a friend. However, Lan Sha did not seem to care about this at all. He casually waved his hand. It's okay. My army has almost completely broken through the brand's proud blockade line. In addition, Blank's army's suicide attack this time. Although it achieved your assassination goal, it also exhausted their last bit of resistance. In the following battle, as long as we continue to fight, the brand won't be able to defend the north. And even if we stop attacking, the most troublesome border blockade line is still in our hands. We can launch a fatal attack at any time. He paused and looked at Tang Yin. Of course, if it's confirmed that I'm dead or have fallen into the hands of the brand, my army should be in turmoil. At this time, if the brand counterattacks at all costs, it's still possible to take back the border. He was professional and honest enough. This was indeed the truth. However, in this way, the pressure would undoubtedly be on Tang Yin's side. Thinking about the day when he could also control the situation in the continent, Tang Yin could not help but feel a little emotional. A damn assassin could do what he did. It was unprecedented. He shook his head and laughed. Your safety can determine the outcome of the war. Haha, this sounds like a boast. Ha, that's right. I'm that good. Chapter 998. That's right. I'm that good. It had to be said that the old saying, one is marked by the company one keeps, made some sense. Look at Lan Sha. When they first met, she was so calm and cold like a queen, but after she became familiar with Tang Yin, what was the situation now? In the face of ridicule and praise, She actually admitted it, so narcissistically shameless. Young people nowadays don't know how to keep a low profile at all. Pouting, Tang Yin, who was completely unaware of Lan Sha's change, secretly criticized a few times, then curiously asked, "So whether you're there or not, it has no impact on the army?" It's impossible to say that it has no impact at all, but I've already made sufficient preparations before, so the impact can be minimized. Lan Sha wrinkled her delicate nose and complained, "I expected that Bran would come to assassinate you. Although I thought the success rate was not high, I still made preparations to prevent accidents. In the end, Grandpa Bamatu was really unreliable and let you sneak in." Correction, I didn't sneak in. I sneaked in with my real ability. You're lucky. If it weren't for Grandpa Bamatu being greedy and messing things up, brother accept. Her words suddenly stopped, and Lan Sha's expression instantly became a little gloomy. The timing of Tiu's return this time was too coincidental. If Lan Sha didn't notice before, because he didn't think in this direction. After seeing the scene of Tang, in sneaking in smoothly and Bamata being late, there was no doubt that Tiu played the role of an accomplice in this. But, brother, do you really want to kill me? What's wrong? Looking at Lan Sha, who suddenly became quiet halfway, Tang In asked inexplicably, "Oh, nothing." After realizing what happened, Lan Sha shook her head gently. Her expression returned to normal, and she casually changed the topic. "It feels a bit strange. Well, I thought it would be Bran who sent someone to assassinate me, but I didn't expect it to be you." Although this topic was changed abruptly, Tang Yin did not dwell on it. He shrugged helplessly and said, "Do you think I wanna? To tell you the truth, if it weren't for you guys attacking the Grey Coat Army, I would be thinking about how to assassinate the King of Bran right now. I would have become famous a long time ago." That's a coincidence. Lan Sha couldn't help but be taken aback when he heard this, and then murmured thoughtfully in a low voice. A vague thought suddenly appeared in his mind, but he was unable to grasp it. He frowned as he thought about it. Tangan did not notice Lan Sha's expression because he had also thought of something. He quickly asked, "By the way, you're the commander-in-chief of the Northern Wilderness. You should know the current situation of the Grey Coat Army, right?" "This, I'm not too sure. There should be casualties on both sides. The combat power of the Grey Coat Army really surprised us." Of course, this answer did not satisfy Tang Yin, but he did not intend to force the answer. He only raised his long eyebrows and asked, "Military secrets?" He shook his head. "No, I really don't know. Well, it involves some other things, so it's hard to say. Just treat it as a military secret." His words were a little vague and hesitant, but Lan Sha was not lying. Although her identity was the highest commander-in-chief of the Northern Wilderness Army, the army that attacked the Grey Coat Army was led by two. In view of the bad relationship between the two, they naturally wouldn't report everything, let alone something so embarrassing. The only reason he knew that the Grey Coat Army was difficult to deal with was because Lan Sha had occasionally heard about it from her subordinates. "I see." Tang In nodded slightly after hearing this. He thought of Josiah, Fry, and other acquaintances of the Grey Coat Army and sighed softly. "Then I hope they're all okay." Tang In was worried about the Grey Coat Army, and Lan Sha was thinking about Tiu. The atmosphere fell into a temporary silence. Only the giant green armor wolf, which was puffing out white smoke, was still running at full speed. Its rough breathing was extremely clear. The speed of the giant green armor wolf at full speed was indeed astonishing. Although it was completely incomparable to a beast like Tang Yin, it was still a complete victory compared to other mounts. Not only was it a complete victory in speed, but its ability to adapt to various terrains, such as forests, hills, and depressions, was also complete without any pressure. And what was even more worrisome was that this giant wolf did not need to be taken care of at all. When it was thirsty, it would drink a few mouthfuls when it passed by the mountain spring lake. When it was hungry, it would jump into the forest to catch a few pheasants and wild rabbits. It would eat as it ran, and its ability to travel long distances was superb. Other than being a little afraid of fire, it was simply a must-have for traveling at home and for killing and robbing. It was not an exaggeration to say that the giant green armor wolf cavalry was at least half of the reason why the wilderness wolf cavalry, an elite troop of the northern wilderness, had such a great reputation today. Thanks to this giant wolf's continuous running, Tang In and Lan Sha had now completely left the outskirts of the small town. They did not know if there were any pursuers behind them, but at least they did not see them in their field of vision. After a moment, Lan Sha put on his glasses that he had just wiped and pushed them up. He finally grasped the vague idea that had suddenly popped up in his mind and opened his mouth to break the silence. Right, where are we going now? Oh, where are you taking me? If I say that I don't know, would you believe me? After thinking about it, Tang In still spread his hands helplessly. That was the truth. He didn't care about the promise and replied foolishly. What? About Josiah? Please, it's easy to guess. Lan Sha spread out her hands and looked relaxed. I've read some information about the Gray Coat Army. I'm very clear about the nature of this team. For a lone assassin like you to join such a team and run around for them, it's natural that you're not doing it for money. Pause for a while. She glanced at Tang In. If that's the case, then there's only one possibility. Although I haven't seen what Josiah looks like, the information says that she's very young and extremely beautiful. Damn, stop. Tang In looked at Lan Sha with a ridiculous expression. Do you think that other than money, men only have beautiful women in their eyes? Shaking her head, Lan Sha said indifferently, Of course not. But in my opinion, at least you're right. Can I swear? Lan Sha frowned and ignored her. She asked, You agree? You've already used such a strong reason. What else do I have to say? Letting out a long sigh, although she still felt that Lan Sha had an ulterior motive, Tang In, who couldn't find any clues, could only agree with the only choice. She nodded. I agree, but you have to talk to the higher-ups about this first. Otherwise, I won't dare to bring you to the Gray Coat Army's base. This was necessary. If they didn't talk it over, just as Tang In brought Lan Sha into the Gray Coat Army's territory, Bamitu would also hold Josiah hostage and ask for a trade. That would be ridiculous. Lan Sha simply nodded in agreement and turned his head. You haven't said anything. Without turning back, she said coldly, Idiot. We just came out not long ago and haven't left the battlefield. Do you think Grandpa Bamitu will agree at this time? Tang In was stunned when he heard that. He also knew that he had asked a stupid question. Now, Bamitu must be thinking about how to save Lan Sha. How could he agree to let Lan Sha enter Bran's hinterland and risk her life? It was only after they had left the battlefield and stepped into the heartland of Baran that Bamitu would agree to it when it was too late. However, although he knew that he was stupid, Tang In still grinned gloomily. Can't you explain it properly? Why did you scold me? I even asked for your opinion when I swore. Women are really strange. Lan Sha didn't reply. In fact, she didn't hear him at all. In front of Tang In, where he couldn't see, her face was cold and she secretly bit her lip. Her fingers were tightly intertwined, pinching each other until there were green marks. They were really lovers. Idiot. Bastard. Rotten person. Josiah. Fine. I like to see how good your taste is. Obviously, Tang In overestimated Lan Sha's IQ. Or, more accurately, Tang In had been tricked by Lan Sha's superb acting skills. In a moment of carelessness, she had managed to trick him into revealing his relationship with Joshua. In fact, Lan Sha was in the northern wilderness. Even if she collected information about the Gray Coat Army, how could she know about the relationship between Tang In and Josiah? Even in Bran, other than the Gray Coat Army, only Philip, Wu Ding, and a few other people from the Sword God's bloodline knew about the relationship between the two. Therefore, Lan Sha was at most suspicious and guessing. She said with certainty that Tang In and Josiah's relationship was just to test the waters. However, after seeing Tang In's tacit agreement, Lan Sha confirmed her suspicions instantly. Her mood was instantly ruined. Tang In, who didn't know that he had been tricked, listened to Lan Sha's smelly tone and looked at her cold and unapproachable face. He was suddenly baffled. He secretly wondered if she was on her period or something. He snickered. After he felt better mentally, he didn't provoke her again. They didn't speak for the rest of the journey. The atmosphere fell into silence again. The difference was that the silence was longer this time. It lasted until lunchtime, when Tang took the hair from the resentful wolf's mouth, roasted it, and handed it over. Only then did Lan Sha return to her normal self. Tang couldn't help but feel depressed. It was really hard to guess a woman's thoughts. If you're hungry, just say it. Why do you have to put on such a face? After finishing their lunch, Tang took off his coat and fiddled with it for a while. When he turned back, he was holding a cloth rope in his hand. He said to Lan Sha with a smile, "Come, let's tie a red string." Putting down the meat in his hand, Lan Sha looked at the cloth rope in confusion. "This is black. You really don't have a sense of humor." They didn't dare to delay. After filling their stomachs, Tang and Roland once again got on the wolf's back and hurriedly left. The only difference was that this time, Tang and Lan Sha's left wrists were tied together with a black cloth rope. Well, the material was taken from Tang An's half of his coat. Tang naturally thought about the reason why he tied the rope. It was fine if they were in a hurry. The two of them were riding on the wolf's back together. Their front clothes were attached to the back clothes. Tang was absolutely sure that Bamitu wouldn't have a chance to attack them. However, it was hard to say when it came to eating and sleeping. It wasn't that he was afraid that Lan Sha would run away, but Tang was worried that he would inadvertently walk more than 10 feet away. After all, it was only a matter of a few steps. He might die if he went to relieve himself. Now that there was a rope connected, it could serve as a reminder. Lan Sha didn't have any opinion on this. She was now focused on the red string illusion that Tang casually mentioned before. The latter's excuse was naturally the ancient custom of his hometown. However, this made Lan Sha's mood very good. Listen, the reason why a man and a woman could meet in the vast sea of people and finally walk together was actually because of the red string of fate that bound them together. Well, it was a good custom. Good things should be carried forward. She could consider promoting it in the tribe. Well, let's not talk about Lan Sha's daydreaming. After the green armor wolf ran for another 10 kilometers at full speed, the two of them encountered trouble. This was a very ordinary mound and depression. There was still some distance from the mountain road. If it weren't for the fact that they were riding on the green armor wolf that was extremely good at climbing hills and moving in a straight line, Tang and Roland wouldn't have discovered the hundreds of barbarian corpses lying in the depression. This was a battlefield, so it was natural for corpses to appear. However, the key point was that these barbarian corpses were still warm and the smell of blood was strong. It was obvious that they had died not long ago. It's the patrolling soldiers that were stationed here. After quickly identifying the corpses, Lan Sha frowned slightly. She looked at the surrounding terrain and muttered thoughtfully, "A large number of brand soldiers appeared here. The hundreds of barbarian soldiers were not a small force. If they wanted to take them down in one go, the number of brand soldiers would have to be 5 or even 10 times more than the number of barbarian soldiers in order to complete the task in one go." There was no doubt that it was abnormal for so many brand soldiers to suddenly appear here. This was because this was now the territory of the northern wilderness tribes. You don't know? Hearing Lan Sha's slightly surprised tone, Tang was instantly stunned. Didn't the scout captain who came with me say that the brand soldiers were unusually active here? They should have the same idea as me, which is to target you. Don't tell me that you didn't see this information and didn't prepare for this at all. Lan Sha heard this and immediately rolled his eyes. There's so much information about the battle situation every day. How can I read it all? Besides, I already knew that the Brand's army would follow the clues to find out my location, so the defense of the small town was not a problem at all. Tang was anxious. If it's not the problem of the small town, then you didn't send people to clean up this place? Lan Sha spread out his hands. Why would I clean up? It's easy to defend the town. It's better for them to come here and die. Why would I want to alert them and clean them up? F***CK, you're the one who got me killed. Tang face turned bitter when he heard this. He put his hand on Lan Sha's shoulder, and the two disappeared in an instant. The giant wolf that was lying on the slope waiting for them suddenly got up and looked around vigilantly. Then it turned around in a daze and wondered where its two masters went. In fact, if it raised its head, it would find that its two masters were now standing in midair, looking down from the front, back, left, and right. Their expressions changed drastically. The Permethought teleportation was Tang Un's most powerful skill at this stage. With this skill, Tang Un did not need to fly, but he could achieve better results than flying. It was also because of this skill that Tang Un really had the confidence to challenge the void-level warriors from another world. However, looking down from the sky at the Brand's army that covered the mountains and plains, Tang Un's legs were a little weak. He was not confident at all. Could they charge out like this? He licked his dry lips. Is this what you mean by no problem at all? I mean the small town. Lansha was not very confident. She did not expect that Bran would be in such a precarious situation and make such a big move. It was hard to say about the small town, but their current situation was undoubtedly tragic. She took a deep breath. Sigh. Commander, you're a professional. Give me some constructive suggestions. I'm not the commander. I'm now a hostage. And I'm... Chapter 999. A few days later, in the afternoon. The winter drizzle was a little annoying. Although the rain was not heavy, it was unusually cold when mixed with the biting cold wind. Looking from afar, coupled with the gray and gloomy sky, it looked very lonely and oppressive. However, at the foot of the mountain, which was obviously the temporary camp of the army, it was not affected by the weather at all. At the various checkpoints on the periphery, the guards in ice-cold armor stood upright. They squinted and looked around from time to time with vigilance, as if they did not feel the bone-piercing cold at all. They were in an extremely focused state. In the camp, although there were not many people walking between the tents of different sizes, the soldiers patrolling back and forth did not relax at all. They meticulously patrolled back and forth. When they encountered leaking tents that were not set up properly, they would leave someone to help, give a hand, thank them, and simple interactions. It was like a small white flower in the black mud, with a faint fragrance and a faint warmth. It also slightly dispelled the haze that enveloped the sky. In the middle of the camp, there was a slightly larger tent. With a soft sound, water droplets splattered everywhere. The oilcloth curtain was lifted from the inside, and a burly middle-aged man quickly walked out. First, he carefully turned around and closed the curtain to prevent the cold from entering. Then, he raised his head and nodded at the guards who were standing in the rain with bloodshot eyes. He said softly, "Go and rest. I'll take care of it for a while." "It's okay, Captain. We can still hold on, I know, but the leader just closed his eyes to rest. He won't need you for a while. Why don't you go and have a good rest and refresh yourself? I still need you to keep watch at night." "Yes." Seeing that the middle-aged man insisted, the two guards hesitated for a moment, nodded, and left. Taking a breath, the middle-aged man with the same bloodshot eyes wiped the rain off his face, shook his head, and held the hilt of his sword to guard the center of the curtain. His name was Victor, the leader of the Gray Coat Army, and also the captain of Josiah's guards. Oh, there had been some changes in his duties recently. Although he was still the captain of the guards, he was no longer in charge of Josiah's safety. Instead, it was handed over to a group of people who had just joined the Gray Coat Army. And he, Victor, was now more like a handyman. Don't misunderstand. Victor wasn't jealous, nor did he have any resentment. That was the logic. Those people from the Gray Space were indeed more powerful and professional than the Imperial Guards. But when he realized that the gap between the two sides was too big, he couldn't bring up any thoughts of jealousy. Moreover, both sides had the same goal, and everything was for the sake of their leader. "My lord, Shah." A group of patrolling soldiers passed by and were stunned when they saw Victor personally guarding the entrance. Just as they were about to greet him, Victor quickly gestured for them to keep quiet and pointed at the tent behind him. The patrolling soldier instantly understood. He nodded and saluted silently. Then he walked past them quietly. Needless to say, the person in the tent was naturally Josiah, who had just closed his eyes and rested. Everyone in the Gray Coat Army respected this new leader who had been in office for less than 2 years. This could be seen from the actions of the patrolling soldiers who subconsciously walked lightly, afraid of disturbing her rest. Josiah also lived up to this respect. She led the remnants of the army to retreat into the depths of the 100,000 mountains, constantly encouraged, and even led the army and people to share weal and woe together. Then, in just a short year, she decided to fight her way out of the 100,000 mountains and took down this seemingly inconceivable territory. It seemed that nothing could overwhelm her seemingly weak body. No matter how difficult the problem was or how difficult the obstacle was, she always had a way to deal with it calmly. Her mental state was also always so vigorous. Whether it was on the battlefield, in the wounded barracks, or in the residences of the people, as long as it was the territory of the Gray Coat Army, she could always be seen. She could also be seen with a warm smile, as if she would never be tired, but everyone would be tired. In the beginning, when the people realized this problem, they would always advise her to rest more and not work too hard. Every time, she would always nod and thank them with a smile, but she would still turn around and continue to run around. Sometimes, when she was forced by the lords, she would always have an excuse to quibble. For example, she had already rested just now, and then she would ask the guards who had greeted her in advance to testify. When none of the guards were willing to testify, she would come up with a new excuse. For example, she was a mage, and mental state was her specialty, so she would not be tired. Looking at the misty rain in the distance, Victor shook his head lightly and smiled bitterly. All right, this excuse was indeed tried and true, because other than her, there were no other mages in the Gray Coat Army, so there was no way to tell if this was true or not. Over time, looking at their leader who was always energetic, the simple people also believed this excuse. They even thought that she was indeed a noble and mysterious mage, and that ordinary people could not compare to her. Victor shook his head again with a bitter smile. As Victor's personal guard, he certainly knew how tired the mysterious sorcerer was behind other people's backs. Especially in the past few days, the sudden attack of the barbarians had completely disrupted the deployment of this side. Although the command center had been divided into two, one on the left and one on the right to guard the fatal path, and there was no danger of being wiped out in one fell swoop, the war had still inevitably broken out. After fighting with the brand for decades, the enemy had suddenly become the barbarians. This made the Gray Coat Army very uncomfortable, and also increased the pressure on their leader, Josiah. Although they had fought to a draw with the barbarian army by relying on the purple bore cannons and the soldiers who were not afraid of death, the stalemate would not last long. However, everyone could see that this stalemate wouldn't last long. In fact, the barbarian army was like a nail that had penetrated into the Gray Army's territory. The only thing was that the effect was not obvious yet. Once the barbarian army was completely penetrated, their strength would be exhausted. When that time came, the Gray Coat Army that had been divided into two would inevitably face a situation where one side would be injured. Not to mention the leader, Victor was also numb to the sight of the corpses of his fellow soldiers being carried down and buried on the spot. There were wounded soldiers everywhere, dead people everywhere, and graves everywhere. No one knew what to do. Only Josiah, like a flag nailed to a certain high ground on the battlefield, silently striking the big drum in front of him with his hammer, and the sound was thunderous. The soldiers below followed the drumbeat and attacked crazily like a raging tide, crazily waving their swords and attacking. The war was fought by the soldiers, and the commanders were in charge of the command. The leader stood alone on the battlefield, silently striking the drum, and it seemed that he was not doing anything. But a more interesting phenomenon was that the position where the leader stood every day, no matter how close he was to the front line, had never been lost. It was like a silent signal, and also like a symbol with clear meaning. Josiah did not give the order to mobilize, but all the soldiers of the Gray Coat Army looked at the place where the leader stood every day and knew where the target of the day was. If they lost, no matter what, they could not retreat to the front of the leader and bring the danger to him. Of course, the result was that they lost more often than not. Almost every day, they would lose some positions. Some were strategically abandoned, and some were actually never fought. But no matter what, when Yi Luo retreated, the soldiers did not feel much frustration. Because they had already achieved their goal for the day, and did not let the leader down. Moreover, they had protected the leader, so they were very proud. The next day, they fought with the barbarians again with increased confidence. This scene made it seem that the result of the battle with the barbarians was far less important than whether the leader was disappointed or not. Of course, the leader appeared on the battlefield every day with the drum, and naturally attracted the attention of the barbarian commanders. They seemed to understand the reason why the brand soldiers were so crazy, and the barbarians also became crazy. Every day, they piled up a large number of soldiers and rushed to the position where the leader was. Victor grinned again. This time, it was not a bitter smile but a proud smile. Because at that time, Victor understood Josiah's intention. That's right, this was actually a small trap. The barbarians piled up a large number of soldiers and tried in vain to kill the leader. But they did not know that such an obvious tactical plan made it very easy for them to make the necessary arrangements. Originally, they needed to defend more, but now they only needed to defend a little. This was undoubtedly a good thing for the Gray Coat Army, who was having a hard time holding on. The only thing that made them feel uneasy was the safety of the leader, who was the bait. In fact, the barbarians almost succeeded a few times. Every day, after paying a huge price, there would always be more or less barbarian teams that would break through the layers of defense and reach the high ground. At that time, if the members of the Gray Space had not taken over the leader's safety and had not appeared several times to protect the last line of defense on the high ground, the consequences would have been unimaginable. Fortunately, it was only a daunting experience. The leader still appeared on the battlefield with the drum every day. She did not care about the surrounding mountains of corpses and seas of blood. She only lowered her head, and her ponytail fluttered from time to time. She silently waved the mallet and beat the drum. Beat, 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 dong, dong, dong. Finally, she beat the dawn. This morning, when the leader once again appeared on the high ground with the drum, when the soldiers once again entered the battlefield, when the gloomy sun had completely risen, there were no longer any barbarians that were crazily charging towards them. They had retreated. The barbarians had retreated. Thinking of this, Victor, who had instantly clenched his fist, could not help but wave it in the air. His face was full of excitement, as if the last beat of the drum in the morning was still echoing in his ears. Leader Josiah raised his head for the first time, waved the mallet, and shouted with all his might, "We have won!" Then, deafening cheers filled the mountains and plains. After that, it was now. The leader's hand was wrapped in a thick bandage, and she slept soundly on the table for the first time in the day. The corners of Victor's mouth curled up slightly, and he smiled. He thought of the scene where Josiah, who had asked him to remind her to visit the wounded barracks a moment ago, and the next moment he suddenly slumped on the table with a thump. Victor could not help but shake his head. At that time, he was really scared. He thought that a barbarian assassin had sneaked in. Later, he confirmed that Josiah was extremely tired and had fallen asleep. Sleep, sleep. It would be best if you could sleep for a while longer. Thinking of this, Victor looked around even more vigilantly. He was not worried about barbarian assassins. That was a problem that David and the others in the Gray Space would be responsible for. Now, he only wanted to eliminate any sources of noise around the tent so that Josiah would not be suddenly awakened. Well, this rain really came at a bad time. Just when Victor was considering if he should add another layer of barrier on the tent to directly block the raindrops falling on the tent, the sound of hurried footsteps on the water suddenly rang out. Frowning, he turned his head and was stunned. Not far away, a group of people covered in mud and dust walked quickly towards him. The one leading the group was a general with deep eye sockets. He looked extremely tired, and his left arm seemed to be injured. It was wrapped in a wooden plank to fix it, and it was not very convenient for him to walk. "Greetings, General Fry, sirs and sirs." Victor quickly walked forward and greeted them with a salute. That's right, the people who came were the higher-ups of the army who resisted on the other side of the main road, Fry and the other generals. They must have found out that the barbarian army had retreated this morning, so they smoothly passed through the main road and came here. "Haha, it's Victor. Why are you guarding in person today?" The one leading the group was Fry. He patted Victor's shoulder. Obviously, they were very familiar with each other. "Where is the chief? Is she okay?" "General, don't worry. Everything is fine." Victor paused and looked at Fry and the others. He looked a little hesitant. "Are you here to see the chief?" "But she just fell asleep not long ago." Fry and the others were stunned when they heard this, but then they understood. They knew Josiah's character very well. There was only one reason why he would fall asleep during the day, and that was because he was really tired. It's nothing important. "Well, let's wait for the chief to wake up." Before Frey's voice could finish, a slightly lazy voice suddenly came from the tent. "Is it Brother Fry? Come in and talk." Fry was startled. He looked at Victor, who shook his head with a bitter smile and turned to open the curtain. He knew that he had woken up Josiah, and he couldn't help but feel a little embarrassed. But since Josiah had already noticed, of course, he couldn't turn around and leave now. He could only walk into the tent first. Josiah had indeed just woken up. His slightly swollen eyes were half open and half closed. At this moment, he was holding a cup of ice-cold tea and drinking it in one gulp. It seemed that he wanted to use this to drive away the drowsiness that couldn't go away. "I'm sorry, Chief, for disturbing your rest." Fry immediately apologized as soon as he entered the tent. Putting down the cup, Josiah waved his hand indifferently. "Brother Fry, what are you saying? You're injured?" He saw Frey's left arm that was fixed with a wooden board and immediately asked in surprise. "It's no big deal. It's just a small bone injury. It will heal in a few days." Fry, who had spent most of his life on the battlefield, of course wouldn't care about these small injuries. In fact, for them, as long as the parts were still intact, it was just a small injury. But when Josiah saw this, he frowned. "Have you been treated? What about those high priests of the temple? Brother Fry, you must have personally led people to the front line of the battlefield, right?" When Fry heard this, he suddenly looked a little embarrassed. It seemed that Josiah had guessed correctly. He scratched his head. "It's really just a small injury. Well, I was careless, and the command center was attacked by the barbarian scouts. I had to lead the troops to break through the siege. I didn't deliberately put myself in danger." He didn't elaborate, but with just a few simple words, anyone could imagine the emergency situation at that time. Previously, although the Gray Coat Army was divided into two, it was only a simple and rough division. According to the overall strength, there was no doubt that Frey's side had more soldiers and stronger fighting power. Therefore, the pressure they had to bear was naturally heavier. As the commander-in-chief, Frey's left arm was only injured. It had to be said that this was an extremely lucky thing. After his words, Fry noticed that Josiah's hands were wrapped in a thick bandage and looked like bear paws. He was shocked. "Leader, your hands?" "Oh, I sprained them." Josiah waved his white bear paws carelessly. He also gave a simple and concise answer. It wasn't that he didn't want to explain, but he was really dizzy and didn't know where to start. What could he say? That he had been beating the drums for a few days and the web between his thumb and forefinger had cracked and sprained them? Then he would definitely have to explain why he beat the drums for no reason. All right, it would be better to just say that his hand was sprained. Although he felt that spraining two hands at once was a little unbelievable, Fry didn't ask further. It was fine as long as he knew that it wasn't a big deal. He asked anxiously, "Leader, the sudden retreat of the barbarians this time, was it his doing?" The retreat of the barbarians this time was indeed strange. Although the Gray Coat Army fought well, it was definitely not to the extent that the barbarians were scared away. If it wasn't for the fact that they had sent out scouts and confirmed that the barbarians were giving up on the positions they had taken with great difficulty and were gradually leaving the battlefield, they wouldn't have believed it. Josiah, Fry, and the others were a little in disbelief. It should be known that the barbarians now had the advantage. If they had held on for a few more days, the main path would have been broken through without a doubt. Thus, the reason for the retreat of the barbarians definitely didn't come from the battlefield, but from outside the battlefield before Tang and went to the front lines. The members of the Gray Space under Tommy's command passed a message to Josiah, Fry, and the others that he was familiar with. He told them to hold on for a while, and that he would solve this problem. Thus, after the barbarians retreated abnormally, Fry naturally thought of Tang Un and hurried over to verify. However, because Tang Un's name was still taboo in the Gray Coat Army, even though he knew that most of the people present knew about Tang Un, Fry still hurriedly changed his words halfway through a sentence. Of course, Josiah knew who Fry was referring to. The corners of his mouth rose slightly, and he nodded without hesitation. Yes, it's him. Fry was stunned by his certainty. Leader, you've already received the news? Could it be that he really, killed the barbarian commander? Josiah shook his head, but his confidence didn't change. I didn't receive the news, so I don't know. But I know that he was the one who made the barbarians retreat. Pause for a while. He asked the others naturally, am I the only one who feels that this scene is very familiar? The Gray Coat Army was in danger, and then he came out to turn the tide. He has already done this kind of thing several times. Yes, of course, he likes to show off a little hot, but other than him, can you think of any other reason? Fry and the others looked at each other when they heard this. At this point, they were basically speechless. It was like a brainless fan who had decided on what to do. Well, since the leader said so, then it's him. Chapter 1000. At the same time, outside the faraway capital of Bran, a few people were talking about the object of worship of this brainless fan. Master, there's news. Haita hurriedly descended from the sky above Wu Ding's small residence to the inner courtyard, then instantly flashed into the inner hall. His expression was both excited and strange as he anxiously shouted. In the inner hall, Wu Ding, who was wearing a thick blanket, was sitting at the head of the table. Philip and Winston were sitting on his left and right. They seemed to be drinking tea and chatting. However, before Haida landed, the few people in the room had already noticed, so they all looked at Haida, who flashed in and stopped talking. Master, there's news from the front line. Haida didn't forget to salute and repeat it again. Wu Ding and the others frowned. As the few people from the Sword God's bloodline, they obviously knew what Haida was talking about. However, Wu Ding was also calm. He waved his hand slowly and said, have a cup of tea first, then we'll talk about it in detail. Damn, why are you still putting on airs at this time? Why don't you just say whether that guy succeeded or not? Philip's mouth twitched. He obviously didn't care. However, his hands were not slow. He quickly poured a cup of tea and handed it over. Haida took it and thanked him. He raised his head and drank it. Then, he pondered for a while, as if he was organizing his words. Then, he said, the latest news is that the barbarian army in the front line has collectively shown abnormal movements. Most of them have stopped invading Bang. What the F***CK? Before Haida could finish his words, Philip instantly became excited. He slapped the tea table with a face full of excitement. That guy really succeeded? He killed the commander of the barbarians in the northern wilderness? Aha! I knew he could do it. Are you kidding me? How could someone who can make friends with me be ordinary? Ha! Compared to Philip, who was so excited that he started to talk nonsense, Winston was stunned when he heard this. He wasn't very excited, but he couldn't hide his shock and confusion. He actually succeeded. How could it be? That was a battlefield where people were dying every moment. That was the supreme commander who was protected by tens of thousands of soldiers and countless experts in the army. How could he? Shock and disbelief because he couldn't do it. After the shock, it was followed by a deep sense of loss. When Sillin lowered his head to hide his emotions. He had never felt so deeply before that the gap between him and the person who had brought him endless humiliation was growing larger and larger. Right now, he could only look up to him, whether he was willing or not, whether he admitted it or not. Shut up. Glancing at the smug Philip, Wu Ding was really calm. He had already noticed that in addition to the excitement on Sada's face, there were also doubts and worries. Therefore, after stopping Philip, he nodded to Sada and said, continue. Well, Master, do you remember that not long ago, you suggested that the Frontline Legion launch a large-scale counterattack against the barbarians to create an opportunity for Twain to fish in troubled waters? After a short pause, Haita actually changed the topic and talked about this somewhat irrelevant matter. Wu Ding nodded. I remember. Why? A few days after your suggestion, The frontline army seemed to have confirmed the location of the mysterious commander. He's in a small city. However, they didn't immediately report to the capital's military. Instead, they quickly organized their own soldiers to encircle and annihilate them. Hearing that the frontline army was acting on their own, Wu Ding couldn't help but snort. His expression was a little unhappy. However, there was nothing he could do. After all, he was a sword god and not a war god. The imperial court respected him, but the army might not. Moreover, the other side didn't know about Tang En's existence, so there was no trust. Therefore, he was naturally more willing to trust his own tactics and soldiers. Seda naturally understood the inside story. He continued, they didn't succeed. According to the information, when they arrived at the small city, although they besieged it day and night for several days, they couldn't take down the small city. The reason was that the barbarians seemed to have expected this and were well prepared. But when they attacked the small city, the barbarian army in Thunder City and Tsang Yin City's defense zone had already stopped their invasion. Pause for a while. Seda shook his head doubtfully. There's something strange about this. According to the time, the barbarian army stopped their invasion first. That means that Tang En might have succeeded. But then, the Zichan Legion's soldiers hit a snag in the target city. It seems that the mysterious barbarian commander is still in the city commanding the battle. Moreover, the barbarians' movements after that also seemed strange. Although they didn't stop their invasion, according to the frontline intelligence, they didn't appear to be very chaotic and didn't retreat. They even deployed troops in some places to reinforce the city's defense. It seems that they just entered a temporary truce to recuperate. Wu Ding frowned. He couldn't help but feel a little puzzled. As mentioned before, the highest commander was very important to the barbarian army. Once the commander was lost, the barbarian army would inevitably fall into chaos, even if they didn't retreat immediately. But now, the barbarian army was in an abnormal situation. However, this abnormality was still within a controllable range. Such a rare situation naturally made Wu Ding, Seda, and the others very confused. They didn't dare to confirm whether Tang En had succeeded or not. Is it possible that both sides suffered losses? After a short period of silence, Winston suddenly raised his head and spoke of his own judgment, and it caused the corners of Wu Ding and Seda's brows to twitch slightly. Twain's methods have always been complicated and deceitful, so there's a possibility of a successful assassination. But the barbarian commander has countless experts around him. It's impossible for him to succeed. Could it be that Tang En injured the barbarian commander? That's why the barbarian army didn't have the intention to invade. So, they had to stabilize the situation while treating the commander's injuries? This conjecture is very likely. It also explains why the barbarian army is entrenched at the moment. Seda nodded in agreement after thinking about it. But Philip wasn't happy when he heard this. If this was true, then Tang En would undoubtedly die in the enemy's camp. He shook his head and said casually, if this is possible, then it's better to say that the barbarian commander is a beautiful woman. Tang En couldn't bear to kill her. So, he simply knocked her unconscious and carried her away. Then, the barbarian army found that the commander was missing. So, they naturally didn't dare to act rashly. The more Philip made up, the more reasonable he felt. He couldn't help but laugh out loud. Isn't this also explainable? It's just that his taste is a little heavy. I heard that barbarian women are all big and hairy. But that guy's always been wretched. Maybe he likes this kind of thing. Ouch. With a cry of pain, Wu Ding, who could no longer bear to listen, slapped the back of Philip's head. He glared angrily and said in a deep voice, nonsense. Shut up. Discussion. What I said is also reasonable. Philip raised his hands to protect his head and grumbled. Seda looked at him with a faint smile and added, Philip, don't judge others by yourself. After all, not everyone is like the imperial flower wolf. F***CK. Philip, who was exposed, immediately raised his head and retorted, yes, he's not. But don't forget, he's the guy who stole the imperial flower. Well, he stole the woman I like. Ouch, I'll stop talking. I'm just talking nonsense. Don't hit me, don't hit me. As he cried out in pain, Philip scrambled away from the range of Wooding's arms. He then rushed out of the inner hall in a sorry state, not even daring to look back. Where were we? After beating away his unreliable grandson, Wu Ding calmly picked up his teacup, thought for a moment, and said, I have confidence in Tang Bing Yao, but there must be something wrong. It doesn't make much sense to speculate here. Haida, you'd better go back and urge the military to test him again. After a pause, he continued, Our border defense line has almost completely fallen into the enemy's hands. In other words, if we can't take it back, the northern wilderness tribes can attack the Bran at any time. This is very disadvantageous for us. We have to let the military make plans early. Yes. Then the Gray Coat Army. Wait a little longer. Little Tang won't die so easily. Okay. It had to be said that some seemingly straightforward sayings actually had some truth in them. For example, if you want to know a person's character, you have to see what kind of friends they have. This was the so-called birds of a feather flock together. Wu Ding and the others didn't believe Philip's judgment. They thought it was nonsense. Even Philip himself didn't believe it. But who would have known that Philip's nonsense was actually half true? The frontline battlefield, wilderness, and flatland. Occasionally, there would be ups and downs, but they were all inconspicuous hills and depressions. They couldn't be used as barriers to hide. Now, in this wilderness that was suitable for running horses and herding sheep, there was a scene of a high-speed chase. On one side, there was a black mass of armored cavalry. Looking down from above, they were like a pack of wolves that stretched their wings and advanced at high speed. On the other side, there were only two people that looked like prey. They were running on foot, but their speed was slightly faster than the former. Huff! Mother Asterisker, what the hell? I said we were on the same side, and you still want to fight? Can't you see my handsome face and perfect body? Which part of me looks like a barbarian? Mother Asterisker, you still don't understand Bran language. Even my breathing is standard Bran accent. Why don't you believe me? Mother Asterisker. Huff! Don't talk nonsense. You're going the wrong way. There's a blockade in front. Turn left a little. Turn left, and you'll go back. The right is the border of the battlefield. Charge! Needless to say, the two people who were running for their lives were Tang In and Lan Sha. Ever since they found out that they had run into the Bran army a few days ago, they started running. At first, Tang In thought that he was lucky. He thought that he had a standard Bran face, and Lan Sha didn't look like a burly Bran woman. Moreover, both of them could speak standard Bran language. Maybe they could get away with it. But who would have thought that after encountering a small squad of Boran scouts, what followed was an endless pursuit? Even the giant green-armored wolf, which was a great escape tool, was killed, of course. It was only later that Tang In realized that it was because of the green-armored wolf that they were being chased by the Bran soldiers. As mentioned before, the green-armored wolf wasn't an ordinary mount. Even the high-ranking officers of the Northern Wilderness Army might not have one. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that other than the Wilderness Wolf Riders, the rest of the people who rode the green-armored wolf were all important figures in the barbarian army. Oh, the time when Tang In was a scout didn't count. That was a special situation. The general of the Southern Wilderness Army appreciated Tang In very much. That was why he was given the mount. In other words, in the eyes of the Bran soldiers, as long as they could capture or kill a barbarian who could ride a green-armored wolf, they would be rewarded with a great merit. At first, the Bulin soldiers were not sure if Twain and Roland were important figures in the barbarian army. But after Twain, who was enraged, broke through several blockades in a row with incomparable ferocity, the Bulin soldiers were incomparably convinced that they had received a great merit. Look at this speed, this level of strength, and this level of strength. And he is only a guard. Then, that woman who looks so weak and fragile must be an important figure among the barbarians. They had a chase. They couldn't let go of her, even if they were at the ends of the earth. Of course, even without the green-armored wolf, Tang In's speed was still not something these ordinary soldiers, or even light cavalry, could compare with. But no matter how fast he was He couldn't escape the heavy encirclement and the enemies that were everywhere. As soon as the misunderstanding arose, Tang In made a prompt decision to give up the southern route, which was the closest route to the brand's hinterland. He changed his route to break through the encirclement to the west. He took a big detour, hoping to leave the battlefield first. But although his plan was good, the enemy's general seemed to have recognized them as important figures. He deployed his troops and set up layers of blockades. He wanted to surround them and kill them. Until now, except for the first night when Tang In rested, he had been running for the rest of the time. Moreover, it was worth mentioning that Tang In was running with Lan Sha, not alone. If he was alone, Tang In would have escaped from the battlefield long ago. But with Lan Sha, who didn't know any martial arts, he had to carry her without letting her get hurt. This almost made Tang In run out of breath. Fortunately, the dawn was right in front of him. Looking at the Buran infantry that was also in an arc several miles away, Tang In grinned and yelled, "You've been watching the show for so long. That should be enough, right? Are you going to make a move or not?" Of course, he wasn't talking to Lan Sha on his back. Instead, he was talking to an old man who had been following them from the beginning. I'll say the same thing. Put down that girl Lan Sha, and I'll make a move to keep you safe. The voice wasn't loud, so outsiders couldn't hear it. But Tang In heard it very clearly. It was as if the voice was next to their ears. There was no need to guess. It was Bamatu. "Keep my ass." Tang In shook his head and refused without thinking. He said sarcastically, "If you really want to keep me safe, why did you secretly make trouble for me these days?" Yes, Bamatu did make a move these days. He didn't make a move on Tang In directly. He hadn't found the opportunity yet. He just kept making some small moves, the kind that was very obscure. For example, when Tang In wanted to find a place to hide, or simply wanted to disguise himself as a brand soldier, he would be immediately discovered and exposed. He could only be forced to keep running. Needless to say, this must be Bamatu's doing. Otherwise, with Tang In's level of disguise and hiding, how could these ordinary soldiers detect him? Of course, because he was worried that Tang In would fight to the death, Bamatu didn't go too far. He just made sure that Tang In couldn't stop and keep running so that he could find a chance to make a move. However, what made Bamatu a little depressed was that this brand kid in his eyes was really at the professional level. Although he didn't sleep for a few days and nights, he still couldn't find a chance to make a move. Seeing that his little trick was exposed, Bamatu was not angry. He changed the topic and said, "Think about it. A few days ago, you were in the small town and also surrounded by many people. Our warriors didn't hurt you at all. But now you are facing thousands of brand soldiers, and they can't wait to kill you. The gap. As an outsider, I feel disappointed. Why don't you just join the tribe? Anyway, you have stayed in the Imperial City before. There's nothing you can't adapt to. Don't worry. I promise to write off all the previous grievances." Elder, but what? You agree? Has anyone told you that if an old man is too talkative, he will be disliked? Haha. Bamatu didn't speak. He seemed to be angry. However, Lan Sha, who was listening with great interest, couldn't help but pat Tang In's shoulder. He covered his mouth and chuckled. With just a few words, Tang In carried Lan Sha and approached hundreds of meters in front of the battle formation. His speed didn't change, and he rushed straight forward. At this moment, he suddenly shouted, "Straight ahead! Raise your head and shoot." As soon as the voice fell, swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. In the dense sound of breaking air, a large black mass of arrows instantly rose above the battle formation. Like layers of thick, dark clouds, with a sharp whistling sound, they pressed down overwhelmingly. This scene was very similar to the scene that Tang In saw in a domestic movie called Hero in the modern world. At that time, Tang In was stunned and his blood was boiling. But now that he really experienced it himself, Tang In didn't even lift his eyelids. He was very disapproving. How to put it, such an attack could pose a threat to ordinary void-level powerhouses, but it was ineffective against Tang In. Just now, he asked Bamatu to take action to warn the other party not to take advantage of the opportunity to make trouble. It was not that Tang In couldn't handle it. In fact, hold on tight. After calmly reminding Lan Sha Tang Un's abnormal speed, which was already faster than a galloping warhorse, instantly increased again. With just a flash, he covered a distance of more than 100 feet, as if he had shrunk the ground to an inch. In an instant, he left the cloud of arrows behind him and avoided the range of the arrows. It was that simple. But this dodging action, which seemed very easy to Tang In, was a miracle to the brand soldiers on the opposite side. With a whoosh, there was a sudden burst of chaos and exclamations. They watched as Tang In ran to the front safe and sound. At this time, the violent voice shouted again, "Don't panic! Don't panic! There are only two of them. Put up shields and spears. Surround him." Before the voice fell, the officer suddenly exclaimed because the two people who ran to the front of the battle formation used some unknown method to instantly pass through countless soldiers and directly appeared in front of him. "Buddy, don't be too sure." Tang In patted the stunned officer on the shoulder and adjusted his helmet. Then he snapped his fingers and said, "Well then, goodbye." The voice was still in their ears, but the two figures disappeared again in front of everyone's eyes. After a pause, a burst of exclamations suddenly came from the back of the battle formation. Behind us. God, how'd they get there? Space magician. It must be a space magician. No way. Are you kidding me? Who could surround a space magician? Well, no matter how shocked these soldiers were, Tang In had already carried Lan Sha into the distant mountains and officially rushed out of this chaotic battlefield. Chapter 1001. After running out of this chaotic battlefield, Tang In and his current position was in the middle of the original Zichen Defense Zone and Thunder City Defense Zone. In this way, although they had yet to leave the big battlefield, they did not have to worry about being chased again for a while. As soon as they entered the mountain range, Tang In found a leeward call and immediately put down Lan Sha. Then he lay on the gentle slope and gasped for breath. His whole body was sweating profusely. He had been running for a long time in the past few days. Although his life was not in danger, those ordinary soldiers were unlikely to hurt him. However, the advantage of the human wave tactic was that although they might not be able to kill you, they could definitely tire you out. Not to mention anything else. Even if the thousands of soldiers who were chasing them stood still and let them be slaughtered, Tang In could not kill all of them, even if he slit their throats one by one. Coupled with a large-scale arrow shooting like just now, as well as the bombardment of some portable small battlefield heavy weapons, Tang In had no choice but to speed up to dodge or simply use the Permethought teleportation to escape. This undoubtedly increased the burden on Tang In, coupled with the fact that Bamitu was playing tricks in the dark and did not let him sleep for a few days. It was not an exaggeration to say that if he did not hear Lan Sha's analysis and knew that he could reach here in a few days, Tang would have turned around and rushed back to the north immediately. He would rather enter the northern wilderness tribes again, take a big detour, and then run back to Bran after 10 days or half a month and suffer here. "Hey, get up!" Lan Sha, who was standing at the side, kicked Tang In's body. Of course, she had been staying on Tang In's back for the past few days. Other than occasionally identifying the direction, she would close her eyes and sleep when she was tired. When she was hungry, she would tear off a few pieces of stored barbecued meat. "Stop fooling around. Let me take a breather first." Waving his hand, Tang In was still lying on the gentle slope with his eyes closed. However, rest was out of the question. Although he seemed to be defenseless now, as long as Bamitu, who was hiding in the dark, approached him, he would immediately turn over and enter a state of battle. Lan Sha kicked a few more times. "Get up, let's solve the problem first." The Grey Coat Army's territory is behind the Thunder City Defense Zone. Although it's still some distance away, if you don't want to sleep and rest all the way, first call Grandpa Bamitu down to negotiate. Tang In immediately opened his eyes. This was a big deal. He propped himself up to stand. Then he shouted to the dense forest of the hills a few hundred meters away, "Elder Ba, stop playing hide and seek. Come out. I have something to say." With a soft snort, Bamitu's figure appeared from the dense forest in the distance. With just one step, he was 50 feet in front of the two people. He squinted his eyes and looked at Tang in seriously, as if he was meeting him for the first time. He curled his lips and said, "Little Bran, you have a dog's nose. Your senses are quite sharp." To be honest, Bamatu was a little depressed now. For the past few days, he had followed Tang in and traveled hundreds of kilometers, but he hadn't found a suitable time to make a move. Naturally, he was very depressed. It wasn't that he hadn't tried to make a move by force, but Tang In's perception of danger was really beyond his expectations. No matter what kind of hidden means he used, before he could get close, the dagger would be on him. If the first 2 times were an accident, then it was worth thinking about if it was the same every time the other party's perception was above his. Realizing this, Bamatu was shocked. Coupled with his careful observation over the past few days, he saw Tang Un's abnormal speed, short-distance teleportation, and elusive body movements. If Bamatu didn't think highly of Tang In before, he thought that the other party could kidnap Lan Sha when he was unprepared. Now, Bamatu didn't have any contempt. Although he still didn't think that Tang Un's strength could be compared to his, he had to admit that the other party now had the ability to threaten him. Hee, it's because your murderous intent is too strong. The smell of blood drifted with the wind. It's hard not to notice it. Tang In shrugged casually and replied in a joking manner. However, this was actually the truth. Tang In didn't know how to perceive, he only knew how to kill. What's more, in the field of hiding and tracking, Bamatu was really not as good as him. In this way, Bamatu, who was full of murderous intent, was undoubtedly a huge and transparent, illuminating crystal in Tang In's eyes. If he wanted to know where he was, he would know a glance. It was easy. However, Bamatu naturally didn't know the inside story. With a gloomy face, he said, "Don't talk nonsense. Why are you looking for me?" "Grandpa Bamatu, I'm the one looking for you." At this time, Lan Sha, who previously remained silent when it came to kidnapping, which made Bamatu and the others very puzzled, opened his mouth. He smiled and pushed away the dagger on his neck. "Grandpa Bamatu, we are now thousands of miles away from the small town. In the past few days, you have seen how Tang In treats me. You should know that he has no murderous intent towards me, right?" That's because this kid knows that I'm following." Bamatu subconsciously retorted. He knew that his words wouldn't hold water. Not to mention that Tang In had indeed protected Lan Sha well in the past few days when he was heavily surrounded. Even before he appeared in the small town, Tang In didn't take the opportunity to assassinate Lan Sha. This was an indisputable fact. So after a pause, he waved his hand again and said, "Girl, what do you want to say?" Lan Sha narrowed his eyes and smiled. Like a little fox, he cracked his fingers and analyzed. "Grandpa Bamatu, you see, the current situation is like this. At present, the situation at the border has been settled. In addition to the necessary cleaning up, the next battle is to attack the hinterland in the north of Bran. You also know that after breaking through the border blockade, except for the cities in the north of Bran, there's almost no systematic defense line to defend. In other words, now we just need to stabilize the territory, and we can attack Bran whenever we want. There's no hurry." Bamatu was silent. He wasn't thinking about these words, but he was waiting for Lan Sha to reveal his true intentions. Tang In raised his eyebrows when he heard this. He thought that the Bran was really at the end of its days. Without Z, it was like a piece of meat exposed on the chopping board. "Now, let's look at our current situation." Lan Sha pointed at himself and then at Tang In. The latter was shaking his head and yawning. Looking disinterested, Lan Sha glared at him and continued, "You have the highest strength. It's not difficult for you to kill Tang In, so Tang In doesn't dare to believe you. Tang In, on the other hand, has your weakness in his hands, which is me. If he wants to kill me, it will be as easy as flipping his hand, so you don't dare to believe him. Of course, there's nothing you can do about him for the time being. Don't be in a hurry to deny it, Grandpa Bamatu. Although I don't know martial arts, I know that you've tried several times in secret these days, but you didn't succeed. Not a few times, but many times." Tang In curled his lips, and his heart was full of resentment. If it weren't for this old man, How could he be in such a difficult situation? Bamitu's eyes twitched when he heard this. With his breadth of mind, he wasn't ashamed to admit this fact. It was just that he felt a little uneasy when he heard it. It sounded like Lan Sha and Tang were on the same side, and he was the outsider. Look, the situation now is like this. No matter how the stalemate continues, there won't be any big changes. Even if the situation doesn't improve, in the end, everyone will be forced to fight to the death. So I suggest, raising his voice, Lan Sha raised his left hand that was tied to Tang Un's. You and Tang Un can reconcile for now. I also want to go to the Gray Coat Army's base with Tang In. Bamitu's expression changed drastically when he heard this. Nonsense. Girl. He waved his hand and interrupted. Let me finish, Grandpa Bamitu. We're going to the Gray Coat Army's base, not to Bran. You know the relationship between the Gray Coat Army and Bran. Tang Un is taking me there for my safety. And I'm the one who came up with this idea, not Tang In. Lan Sha spread his hands. Anyway, we've already come out, and it's too late to go back now. Besides, I've already made arrangements in advance. It doesn't make much of a difference whether the army has me or not. Of course, you have to continue to protect me. I believe that with you, the strongest person in the northern wilderness, watching from the side, no one can hurt me, right? After a little flattery, Bamitu smiled bitterly. What's so good about Bran? Why did you and your mother? Was this really your idea? That kid didn't force you? As if remembering something, Bamitu's expression was a little emotional, but he stopped halfway and turned to look at Tang In with an unfriendly gaze, asking fiercely. Lan Sha immediately nodded. Of course it was my idea. Grandpa Bamitu, let me go and take a look. Maybe I can get an ally for our tribe to fight against Bran? Of course, Bamitu didn't believe this. In his eyes, the Gray Coat Army was a motley crew. Even if they had some fighting power, they wouldn't be much of a threat. It didn't matter whether he had an ally or not. However, Bamitu completely understood. Lan Sha had first analyzed the army situation from a macro perspective, then explained the current situation in detail. After beating around the bush, the main point was that he was determined to go to the Gray Coat Army's encampment. This inevitably reminded him of something. Years ago, there was also a strange little girl like her who snuck out of the Imperial City and insisted on going to Bran to take a look. He didn't object back then, or rather, he couldn't do anything about that stubborn little girl. It seemed that it was still the same now. Bamitu was in a daze, while Tang In and Lan Sha exchanged a few glances. They couldn't help but feel a heavy weight in their hearts. Lan Sha wholeheartedly wanted to go to the Gray Coat Army to take a look and see what kind of person Josiah was. Tang In, on the other hand, was annoyed by being chased around. It wasn't good to be on tenterhooks all day long. Of course, no matter what the two of them were thinking, they had to see what Bamitu's intentions were now. If the other party didn't agree, Lan Sha wouldn't be able to do anything, and Tang In wouldn't be able to do anything either. They could only continue to be in this stalemate and wait for an accident to happen. Wait for one side to be unable to persevere, or wait for the outcome that Lan Sha had mentioned. After a while, Bamitu looked at Lan Sha, who had an expectant look on his face and was almost hugging his shoulders coquettishly. He nodded helplessly. All right, but there are some things that I have to say first. If I feel that the situation isn't good, I'll immediately take you away. At that time, even if I have to knock you out, I'll bring you back to the Imperial City in the northern wilderness. Yeah, thank you, Grandpa Bamitu. Don't worry, I'll remember it. When that time comes, I definitely won't blame you. Waving his hand at the cheering Lan Sha, Bamitu once again set his gaze on Tang In. His helpless expression instantly turned gloomy, and he said fiercely, Brat, count yourself lucky this time. We'll slowly settle this score in the future when we have the chance. Also, from now on, you'll still be protecting Lan Sha on the surface. If anything happens to His Highness, you'll have to pay with your life. F***CK. You've learned how to change your face, haven't you? Looking at Bamitu's two completely different faces, Tang In secretly complained. Of course, on the surface, he still nodded politely, indicating that he understood. In his heart, however, he swore to himself, I'll let you be arrogant for a while, but we'll definitely settle this score in the future. On this side, Tang In and Bamitu couldn't stand each other. On the other side, Lan Sha, after his excitement, rolled his eyes and suddenly raised his arm with a solemn expression. He first announced a string of surnames and titles, then swore on his status as the Royal Highness of Sirius Kingdom. The gist of it was that he wanted to witness this reconciliation and was willing to go to the Gray Coat Army's encampment or something. Tang En was startled when he heard this. Bamitu smiled bitterly, knowing that this was directed at him. Although this was a reconciliation, it was only a verbal agreement and didn't have any binding force. Of course, Lan Sha couldn't make him swear an oath. He could only swear on his status as the Royal Highness of Sirius Kingdom to completely dispel the other thoughts in his heart. Really, a grown girl can't be kept at home. When he thought of this, Bamitu was suddenly startled. He sized up Tang In with a strange gaze and frowned in thought. In the end, he shook his head and felt that he was thinking too much. Impossible. This girl's standards are as high as her mother's. How could she take a fancy to such an ugly guy? Tang In naturally didn't know what Bamitu was thinking. Otherwise, he would have jumped up and down immediately. He wouldn't wait for the future. He would think of a way to send a message to Wu Ding right now. He would risk exposing Lan Sha's identity and see how this old bastard would die. After the negotiations, this wasn't a place to stay for long. Naturally, they had to continue on their journey. However, the difference from before was that the group had changed from 2 people to 3. Lan Sha walked in the middle, Tang In walked on the left, and Bamitu walked on the right. The atmosphere wasn't very good. It was all up to Lan Sha to connect the dots in the middle. However, Lan Sha was in a very good mood. He was also looking for various topics to liven up the atmosphere. Tang In heard a lot of secrets. The biggest gossip was that when the Northern Wilderness Empress sneaked out and went to play in the brand, Bamitu followed her just like he did now. However, after the 2 entered the brand's territory, because they didn't cover up, especially Bamitu's barbarian face, they quickly attracted the attention of the brand. At that time, Bamitu was already the strongest person in the Northern Wilderness. Naturally, he was arrogant and didn't think about hiding his whereabouts. No matter how many brand masters came to investigate, he killed them. Later, he came to seek revenge. Anyway, the more he killed until he went deep into the heart of the Northern Wilderness. According to Bamitu himself, Wu Ding took advantage of the fact that his aura was unstable during the attrition battle and suddenly attacked him with his sword. He was severely injured, causing him to be separated from the Northern Wilderness Empress. Later on, the Empress' purse was stolen. He set up a chess stall in the city to earn money for the journey, and then met Z. Now that he was talking about the past, Bamitu still couldn't calm down. Everyone in the brand is a hypocrite. That bullshit sword god Wu Ding is even more so. When the brand masters formed a group to fight me, he hid among them and didn't make a move. He waited until I was too excited to kill and carelessly revealed a flaw. Then he attacked. Shameless, despicable bastard. Tang In curled his lips as he listened to the side. Naturally, he didn't believe this story. Not to mention, in his opinion, sneak attacks were a common and normal tactic. For example, Wu Ding was now recognized as the strongest person in the Caesar continent, not Bamitu. He didn't even need to sneak attack you. He still didn't know how badly he was beaten back then. Lan Sha wasn't very interested in this part of the story. She wanted to know what happened between her mother and Z. However, Bamitu didn't know about this part of the story either. After he escaped from Wu Ding, he seemed to have been severely injured. He had to recuperate for a long time before he could move about. At that time, the Empress and Z had already arrived at the front lines. Bamitu, who didn't know about this, searched for a long time in the northern hinterland of the brand. In the end, not only did he not find them, he was also targeted by Wu Ding. He could only retreat back to the northern wilderness. In the end, it was the Empress herself who sent back news that she was safe. At this point, Bamitu glanced at Tang In. Thinking of his earlier concerns, he emphasized how despicable, hypocritical, and cunning the men of the brand were, perhaps to prevent a repeat of the tragedy. How they only knew how to use flowery words, how they abandoned their women after seducing them. and so on. In any case, if he wasn't mistaken, this elder used all the derogatory words he could think of. Unfortunately, his efforts were in vain. Tangin wasn't from the brand at all. He only listened to it as a joke and didn't feel any anger at all. Lan Sha had some reaction, but she seemed to have seen through the elder Ba's intentions. She didn't respond, and in the end, the matter was left unsettled. With the speed of Tang In and Bamatu, even with Lan Sha as a burden, their speed was naturally incomparable to that of ordinary horses. In addition, the mountains and cliffs that were impossible to cross in the eyes of ordinary people were just a matter of a flash for them. Thus, the three of them advanced in a straight line. In just half a day, they had walked out of the huge mountain range. Walking out of the mountain range meant that they had more or less left the war zone. Next, they would step into the northern hinterland of the Bran and head towards the Gray Coat Army's encampment. This journey wasn't short. Even with Tangin's speed, it would still take a few days. Fortunately, they didn't have to worry about encountering the Bran soldiers after reaching this point, so they weren't in a hurry. After stepping into the northern hinterland of the Bran, Bamatu spoke to Tang In for the first time. "Kid, although I still want to slap you to death before I do, I have to thank you first." Tang In was stunned when he heard this. He pointed at himself in confusion. "Thank me? What do you mean?" "The Emperor of the Bran. Do you still remember? That little boy from the Charm Fox tribe? Why else would people say that the name was domineering and easy to remember?" After being stunned for a moment, Tang In instantly remembered that when he left the imperial city of the northern wilderness last year, he was seriously injured and unconscious. In the end, he was saved by a pair of siblings from the Charm Fox tribe. "That's right." Bamata nodded. His old face, which had always been hostile towards Tang In, revealed a rare hint of joy. "His talent isn't bad. I've already accepted him as my disciple. That growth-type level 5 magical beast, the illusory ice fiend fox, and the Do Chi in his body. It was you who gave him, right?" "Thank you." Tang In was really stunned this time. At that time, he had only helped the pair of siblings because he wanted to repay a debt of gratitude. He didn't expect that he would give Bamatu a disciple. He rubbed his nose. "No need to thank me. This is his own destiny." "All right, what about his sister? How's the one called Suya now?" "Ah, she's the same as she and I. She's now my maid." Lan Sha smiled as he continued the conversation. Then, as if he had thought of something, he couldn't help but laugh. "Haha, look at what stupid methods you've taught them. That illusory ice fiend fox was hit on the head with a wooden stick all the way to the imperial city. It was almost beaten to death, huh?" Hearing this, Tang In's face instantly turned red. He defended himself. "Weren't we limited at that time? I was afraid that it would be dangerous for them to bring that fox on the road. So, and what were you thinking at that time?" "You actually pretended to be me, huh? So you said that you were very good at it. It's just that your leg hair is a bit too long, huh? Find another chance, you can pretend to be me again." The corner of Tang Un's eyes twitched. He looked at Lan Sha, who was convulsing with laughter, and said expressionlessly, "Elder Ba, do you want to return the favor right now? Now, immediately, hurry up and bring her back. Crack." Chapter 1002. Another year in the Bran Gregorian calendar was coming to an end. It was supposed to be an eventful year, and the situation was complicated and chaotic. However, at the end of winter, it suddenly became strangely quiet. The most powerful barbarian army did not take advantage of the victory to attack the northern hinterland of the Bran. Instead, after occupying the border of the Bran, they withdrew their troops and began construction to consolidate their territory. It seemed that they did not want to advance. The Blank's army, which was retreating, took this opportunity to stabilize their situation. However, because they had lost the border defense line, there was almost no way to defend themselves. They did not know whether to advance or retreat. In the end, most of them gathered their troops and retreated to the towns on the outskirts of the border. Like the barbarian army on the opposite side, they urgently repaired the city walls and confronted each other. The Grey Coat army in the rear had been fighting with the barbarians for a few days. Although they were not seriously injured, they had suffered heavy losses. Under the watchful eyes of the Blank's army, they seemed to have the intention to rest and recuperate. They also withdrew their troops and did not attack. In addition to the three forces on the battlefield, the only force that could be seen was naturally the Temple of Light. In fact, the Temple of Light also participated in this war. For example, the priests who joined the Brand's army to treat the wounded, and the elite teams who formed their own system to hunt down the heresy of the barbaric cult on the battlefield. They had been advancing and retreating with the Blank's army. However, this was talking about the forces of the Temple of Light that did not participate in the war. Among them, the Temple of Light in the south had nothing to say. As for the forces of the Temple of Light in the north, it was not so good. Because of the scourge of Tang In and the dislike of the Grey Coat army, the influence of the Temple of Light in the north had been greatly reduced. Now, they were unable to encircle and suppress a group of clerics who had betrayed the Temple of Light and established an opposing new sect. The two sides went round and round in the vast territory of the north. Not only was there no winner, but because of the matter, the prestige of the Temple of Light fell to the bottom again. Of course, the latter was only a small matter now. Its influence only spread and spread within a small area. Overall, after the chaos of the war, the Brand enjoyed a rare moment of peace before the new year. However, both of them were well aware that such peaceful days wouldn't last for long. It was like the calm sea before a storm. So long as there was an explosive point, it would immediately cause enormous waves to break this delicate balance and throw the world into chaos once more. As for who would be the center of this explosion, where would it detonate? Then, no one knew for sure. However, what was certain was that this young man and woman who had traveled thousands of miles for several days in a row definitely had the potential to become a fuse. The day before yesterday, you said that you could arrive yesterday, and yesterday, you said that you could arrive today. This morning, you said that you could make it in time for lunch, and now, you want to talk about a picnic. Tang In, are you from the Grey Coat army or not? Do you know where the Grey Coat army's territory is? I don't know. I didn't know you were still. He didn't know? I'll scratch you to death. Calm down, calm down. Look, there's a farm in front of us. If you really don't want to have a picnic, we can pay for it. There's no farm in front of us. Tang In, isn't this a little... I know, but the main point is that I've been away from the base for a long time. I really don't know where the Grey Coat army is now. Besides, didn't you say that you wanted to walk slowly and see the local customs of the Brand? If not, we would have arrived long ago. Phew. So it's my fault? How could it be? Although it's the truth. I think it's time to call Grandpa Bamatu down to be the judge. Ahem. Although it's the truth, after thinking about it, the main responsibility is still on me. It's my fault. This was the F*** saying that the situation was stronger than the person. On the mountain path, Tang In, who kept apologizing with a face full of sincerity, sighed in his heart. He couldn't help but feel depressed. This wasn't his fault. When Tang In left the base for the capital, the Grey Coat army was still wandering around the Shirwan Mountains. Now that a few months had passed, who knew where Fry and the others were now? Tang In only knew that their general direction was correct. If they continued walking like this, they would definitely reach the Grey Coat army's base. However, if they wanted to ask for the exact location, sorry, they could only rely on guessing. This made Lan Sha very depressed. At first, she said that she wanted to see the local customs of the Brand, but their route basically didn't pass through the city. They only traveled through the wilderness. Therefore, how could she see the local customs? It was good enough to find a small farm. Most of the time, she could only look at the mountains. Lan Sha had stayed in the northern wilderness tribes for so many years. How could she not see the mountains and rivers? After a while, Tang In assured her that the Grey Coat army's base wasn't far away and that he could take her there as soon as they found out the exact location of the farm. Only then did he manage to pacify Lan Sha, who didn't have the temperament of a commander after leaving the army. As for Bamatu, not long after entering the Brand, he hid again, saying that he was tired of the Brand masters who didn't bother him. However, from Tang's point of view, this old man was probably afraid of provoking Wu Ding and being beaten to a pulp again. If you lie to me again this time, humph. Lan Sha pushed up her glasses, squinted her eyes, and made an unspoken threat. Don't worry, the farm is just in front. It's just that your eyes. Tang paused and looked at the cold light that suddenly flashed through his lens. Tang subconsciously shivered and very perceptively changed the topic. Your eyes are too normal. Only a pervert like me can see further. Huh? What the F asterisk CK? Was that a murderous intent? Was it necessary? It had to be said that Tang still didn't understand women well enough. Any beautiful woman was a combination of narcissism and insatiability, especially when it came to their appearance. On one hand, they felt that they were perfect enough. On the other hand, they were extremely troubled by the subtle flaws on their body. Even if it was inconspicuous, they would always think of ways to cover it up and change it. Lan Sha was also a woman, so naturally, she was no exception. If there was one thing that Lan Sha wasn't confident in, it was definitely her pair of naturally short-sighted eyes. Since it was a weakness, of course, she didn't want others to mention it. Especially when this person was Tang especially when they were about to reach the Gray Coat Army. In fact, Tang really didn't lie to Lan Sha this time. There was indeed a farm in front. It was just that ordinary people couldn't see it yet. Only people like Tang who had been trained with keen eyesight, could detect it in advance. After a while, when the small farm with the continuous mountain range behind it entered Lan Sha's field of vision, Tang narrowed his keen eyesight, but he paused and frowned slightly. What's wrong? I saw something that wasn't very good. Tang touched his nose and raised his hand to point at the farm. There's a flagpole outside with a human head, if I'm not mistaken. Lan Sha was not an ordinary woman. With a wave of her hand, thousands of soldiers were willing to die on the battlefield. Of course, a human head wouldn't scare her. Slightly stunned, Lan Sha didn't show any special expression. Instead, he subconsciously raised his eyebrows and analyzed, bandits or deserters? These were undoubtedly the two most likely situations. Everyone knew that there were many bandits and robbers in the north. Now, with the addition of the war, some scattered deserters might also come out to cause trouble. However, Tang narrowed his eyes and observed, then shook his head slightly. It shouldn't be. There's still smoke in the farm, and there are no vultures or crows circling in the sky. Well, it's hard to say. Then let's go and take a look. Lan Sha was straightforward and walked towards the farm. Tang shrugged and naturally had no objections. Soon, as they got closer and closer, they saw the smoke first, then the flagpole outside the farm and the round object hanging on it swaying like a pendulum. They clearly saw it. Tang didn't see wrong. It was indeed a human head, and it should have been hung up for a while. The head obviously showed signs of drying. There were also a few children playing below. They looked up at the head on the flagpole and seemed to be arguing about something. They didn't feel afraid. However, when Tang and the others approached, a few adults quickly walked out of the farm and quickly took the children back while cursing. Seeing this, Lan Sha shook his head and smacked his lips. Tisk, I didn't expect the customs in the brand to be so fierce. There were children and farmers. Naturally, this farm couldn't have been destroyed by deserters and bandits. As such, the heads hanging outside were even more like what Lan Sha had described as a valiant custom. Yes, it was like a unique decoration. However, Tang certainly didn't think so. At least in his knowledge, he had never heard of such a strange custom in any farm. However, this scene was really strange. Tang was a little uncertain. He could only wait until he entered the farm. The farm was very quiet, or more accurately, it was dead quiet. Every house was closed and the door was locked. If it wasn't for the fact that it was noon and that there was smoke everywhere and they did see people coming out, this was more like an abandoned dead farm. What was even more strange was that although the doors were locked, there were still some sacks of sacks in each house. However, there were a few sacks or tied-up chickens, ducks, and birds at the door. They looked like discarded trash, but they also looked like free gifts. Well, it's really a different custom. He casually opened the sacks. Most of them were rice flour and bread. Looking around at the rows of sacks, Lon Sha couldn't help but shake his head and sigh. It's so special. They are so hospitable. Of course, this was a joke. He clapped his hands and turned to look at the thoughtful Tang Yin. What's the situation? We seem to be treated as bandits. Shaking his head, Tang Yin said, I've heard of this kind of robbery before, but I've never seen it before. Well, this farm should have been encircled by a nearby bandit. Fortunately, or perhaps unfortunately, those bandits don't want to slaughter the village and do a one-time business. Instead, they will come here on a regular basis every month to collect the spoils of war. They're like blood-sucking locusts, biting and not letting go. Lan Sha frowned in surprise. Then why don't these villagers leave? Leave? Where to? Brand civilians are different from you northern wilderness people. You northern wilderness people rely on hunting for a living. It doesn't matter where you go. As long as there are mountains and death, you won't starve to death. But brand civilians rely on farming. Without a few acres of land, they will starve to death even if they escape. Besides, the head on the flagpole outside is there. The bandits won't let this long-term meal ticket escape easily. Lan Shan nodded to show that he understood. He then spread his hands and said, Then what do we do now? The villagers here obviously don't like us. How can we borrow food? Let's look for it again. Maybe. Oh, I found it. Isn't the door open? The farm was not big. With Tang Yin's eyesight, he could only roughly see it after looking around. Soon, he found a dilapidated bungalow with an unlocked door at the end of the farm. Don't be happy too early. In their eyes, we are bandits. Money doesn't necessarily mean they will give us food. Lan Sha squinted his eyes in the direction of Tang Yin's arm, but he still couldn't see which door was open. He couldn't help but pout and pour cold water on them. Don't worry. With my communication skills, it's fine. Oh, I'll wait and see. There was no special emotion. Tang Yin and Lan Sha were not compassionate people, nor were they righteous men. With their experience, they had seen situations 10 times worse than this. Naturally, it was difficult for them to have any sincere anger or the thought of immediately going to help. They were just passers-by who came here to have a meal. There was no need to talk about this. Of course, they also had their own bottom line, which was not to touch the offerings that the villagers gave to the bandits. Because if they did, the bandits would vent their anger on the villagers. That was all. There was an owner in the dilapidated bungalow. He was a skinny old man. Perhaps he had lived to this age and had seen through life and death, or he knew that in the eyes of the bandits, food was much more valuable than his old life. Therefore, he was not afraid of the bandits coming and did not lock the door. It was rare that Tang Yin, who had tried and tested his social skills time and time again, did not manage to get a meal out of this old man. However, Lan Sha did not gloat. On the contrary, he was a little depressed. Because Tang Yin had succeeded just now, the skinny old man readily agreed to the request to borrow food and said that it was free. However, after seeing Lan Sha, his expression suddenly changed. Not only did he not give them food, but he also raised his crutch and wanted to drive them out. What was the meaning of this? Could it be that my identity as the highness of the northern wilderness was exposed? Had I fallen to the point where everyone wanted to beat me up in any corner of the brand? Sir, didn't we agree just now? Tang Yin stepped back helplessly as he waved his crutch. I said, I didn't say anything. The skinny old man was extremely agitated. He waved his crutch and kept driving Tang Yin and Lan Sha toward the door. He shouted, Get out. This is my house. Get out now. Calm down, sir. Calm down. Sir, we've been hungry for a few days. Please do us a favor, or do you want us to give you more money? Hiding behind Tang Yin, Lan Sha decisively used his cute and pitiful skills. Unfortunately, this trick, which had an obvious effect on Bamitu, had no effect on the skinny old man in the brand. Oh no, it had an effect, but it had the opposite effect. It's too late. Get out of here. You're not welcome in this house. Well, just now he was driving them out of the door, and now he was driving them out of the house. However, Tang Yin's heart skipped a beat when he heard this. His ears twitched, and he pulled Lan Sha away, closed the door behind him, and made a gesture to keep quiet. Shoo! Sir, I think it's too late now. As soon as he finished speaking, the ground trembled slightly, and the sound of horse hooves came closer and closer. Then, there was a long name mixed with wild laughter. The newcomers were already outside the house. Sigh, why didn't you listen to my advice? Listening to the noise, the skinny old man's expression changed again. He put down his walking stick, shook his head, and sighed. Then, he thought of something and quickly waved to Lan Sha. Quick, miss, hide in the house. Tang Yin and Lan Sha looked at each other and completely understood. This old man had good intentions. The reason why he had agreed to it earlier, but then he kept driving them away. It was because he saw Lan Sha and was worried that her beauty would fall into the eyes of the bandits who came to collect the offerings, and she would be persecuted. Understanding this, Tang Yin waved his hand and smiled. Sir, don't worry. Don't look at us because we're young. In fact, we're warriors. Taking care of a dozen bandits is not a problem. If the bandits did not come to provoke them, Tang Yin and Lan Sha would basically treat it as if nothing had happened. After all, there are so many tragic things in the world. How many could they take care of? Moreover, if they rashly interfered, it might not be a good thing for the villagers who had lived here for generations. However, if these bandits did not open their eyes, then Tang Yin and Lan Sha would certainly not mind getting rid of them all. However, the skinny old man still shook his head and sighed. Sigh, you don't understand. This group is not bandits. They're an army. Army? Which army? Tang Yin was stunned. What kind of joke was this? Which army would be interested in such an inconspicuous little farm? It was too degrading. It's the Gray Coat Army. What? Admittedly, Tang Yin was really dumbfounded at this moment. He could not believe his ears. He even spat out the English with a native accent, which he did not know much about. Lan Sha was also stunned when he heard this. He blinked and looked at Tang Yin strangely. This wasn't mentioned in the intelligence report. The Gray Coat Army has this kind of side business? Instantly coming to his senses, Tang Yin took a small breath and ignored Lan Sha's teasing. He looked at the skinny old man with a serious expression. Are you sure it's the Gray Coat Army? Who else could it be other than them? The skinny old man's expression became agitated once again. He roared somewhat incoherently, My poor eldest son. Previously, he had listened to the deceptive propaganda of the Gray Coat Army and still wholeheartedly wanted to join them. And that damned unfilial son, he should go to hell. God, what exactly did I do wrong for you to punish me so cruelly? Calm down, sir, calm down. With his hand on the old man's shoulder, Tang Yin suddenly shouted in a low voice. He instantly woke up the skinny old man who had sunk into infinite sorrow. He immediately reached out and took out the simple bamboo pipe tied to the old man's waist. He filled it with tobacco, lit it, and stuffed it into the old man's hand. He then pulled him to the stairs inside the house and sat down. Gently, he said, Sir, don't be anxious. Take a few puffs first and tell me slowly. I'm more interested in this. Please tell me more about it. If what happened here before had nothing to do with Tang Yin, then after the old man mentioned the Gray Coat Army, Tang Yin could no longer stand by and watch. He had to confirm that this was Brand's scheme. Or was it a bandit pretending to be a robber? Or was there really someone from the Gray Coat Army who dared to do such a despicable thing? Of course, the current Tang Yin would never have thought that his intervention during the journey would give him the opportunity to break through. Chapter 1003. The skinny old man finally calmed down from his agitated state of mind as he sat on the steps with a clumsy pipe in his hand. He took a few puffs of his pipe. He smoked so fiercely that when he exhaled the smoke, it instantly covered his wrinkled, sallow old face. Cough, cough. Fine. Since you want to hear it, I'll tell you a story. Right, the door? He suddenly remembered something and looked up at the wooden door that Tang Yin had closed. His expression softened. Oh, it's already closed. He turned his head and looked at Lan Sha, who had brought a wooden stool over and was sitting in the room. His lips moved. Miss, you'd better hide. Lan Sha, who was covering her nose, immediately understood the old man's meaning. She waved her hand carelessly and dispersed the smoke floating in front of her. It's fine. I like to listen to stories. Even if it really is the gray coat army outside, we're not afraid. I just jumped on the wall to take a look. There aren't many people. They can't stop us. Lan Sha lied. She didn't jump on the wall to take a look. However, the old man was too agitated to notice this and didn't know that the well-behaved girl in front of him was lying through her teeth. But then again, if the unfriendly guests outside the manor were all riding horses, then Lan Sha wasn't completely lying. Based on the chaotic sound of horse hooves, the battle-hardened Lan Sha could determine that there really weren't many people outside. Seeing that Lan Sha was determined not to hide, the old man naturally couldn't say anything more. He was also worried that if he continued to cause a ruckus like before, it would attract the attention of the people outside. He could only shake his head and take another puff of his pipe. He waited for the smoke to slowly disperse from his old face before he spoke in a low voice. In the past, there was a pair of brothers in this manor. The older brother was called Han Sun, and the younger brother was called Han Luo. Han Sun was more than 10 years old. He was very sturdy and had a good heart. Not only was he filial to his elders, he would take the initiative to help if there was a family in the manor that was too busy. He didn't ask for anything in return. Everyone in the manor liked him. Han Luo isn't like that. He's been arrogant since he was young, and when he grew up, he became even more unreasonable and overbearing. He did not do any proper work all day long and did not manage the fields that belonged to him at home. All day long, he mingled with a few idle ruffians in the village, walking chickens and fighting dogs and bullying the villagers. A good village was made into a foul atmosphere by them. Later on, I heard that he even mingled with the bandits in the mountains and disappeared for a few months. As soon as he returned home, he stretched out his hand to ask for money. If he didn't give it to him, he would make a fuss, causing his elder brother to be utterly heartbroken. Alas, speaking of this, it's also my fault. It's also his father's fault. Han Luo lost his mother the moment he was born and died in childbirth. Therefore, his father doted on him very much and left all the good things for him since he was young. Later on, when he became more and more outrageous, as his elder brother, Hansen, wanted to discipline him, but his father stopped him. In the end, in the end, he could not change back. As he rambled on about these somewhat irrelevant things, the skinny old man shook his head and sighed from time to time. Then, as if he was choking on the smoke, he paused and raised his hand to wipe away the murky old tears at the corners of his eyes. He was very depressed and dispirited. Tang Yin and Li Wuyo did not rush him and just listened quietly. With their intelligence, they could naturally tell that this pair of brothers, Hansen and Han Luo, were the old man's two sons. Later on, probably around the middle of last year, old Tang Sanguzi came back from his work outside and brought back a lot of new things. Some of them were given by old Tang to the people in the village, including Hansen's family. The things were not important. It was just a token of appreciation. When Sanguzi was not at home, Hansen helped old Tang a lot. On the wrapping paper of that thing, Hansen learned about the Gray Coat Army for the first time. Later on, he found out that the paper was used to advertise the Gray Coat Army. It was called something like a big character poster. I heard that it was posted on the city wall, and Sanguzi took it and wrapped it up. Shaking his head, he continued. Hansen was greatly affected when he saw it. After he asked around about the Gray Coat Army, he became even more fascinated. In the village, he talked about how good the Gray Coat Army was and publicized the deeds of the Gray Coat Army. He also said that he wanted to find a way to join the Gray Coat Army. Because of this, he even quarreled with the disdainful Han Luo and almost got into a fight. Later on, Han Luo ran away and did not come back for a long time. I heard that he mixed with the bandits again. This unfilial son, after Han Luo left, even if Hansen wanted to join the Gray Coat Army, he could not leave the village, because there was still an old father at home. After that, a few months ago, Han Luo, who had disappeared for more than a year, suddenly came back. He rode a horse and carried a sword with him. He was dressed in bright clothes. When others asked him where he had gone, he said that he had joined the Gray Coat Army. He took a few more puffs of his tobacco pipe and muttered in a low voice, "Gray Coat Army, Gray Coat Army." The people in the village were a little scared when they heard that. After all, outside, There were rumors that the Gray Coat Army and the Brand were at war. Only Hansen was very happy. For the first time, he was proud of his good-for-nothing younger brother. So when he heard Han Luo say that the Gray Coat Army needed support and sent them out to gather supplies, Hansen was very active. Not only did he donate most of his family's food and money, he also helped persuade the people in the village to support them. During that time, Hansen was really happy. When he drank with me, he said that his younger brother had finally become successful and had completed the dream that he had always wanted to do but could not do. Ha! He grinned, both bitter and happy. It seemed that he was thinking of Hansen's happiness at that time. It was rare for the family to reunite without quarrels and be happy together. It also seemed that he was thinking of the things that happened after that. His smile was a little bitter. Hearing this, Tang In frowned slightly and shook his head at Lan Sha, who was looking over. In his heart, he was already sure that Han Luo had joined the bandit gang. Now, he was just using the name of the Gray Coat Army to swindle people. The reason was very simple. A few months ago, it was about the time when the Gray Coat Army had killed their way out of Shirwan Mountain. During this time, the Gray Coat Army had been fighting. They had used their battles to support their battles. The warehouses of the Brand cities that they had conquered had a lot of food and supplies. There was no need for them to send people out to gather supplies. But then the situation changed. Han Luo did not fulfill his promise to return the supplies on time. He only said that there were some problems with the logistics of the Gray Coat Army and that they needed some time. At that time, Han Luo did not suspect anything. He even helped to appease the villagers and took out some of the food and money that his family did not have. But Han Luo, who was also the Gray Coat Army, was not satisfied. He continued to urge the villagers to take out the food for the winter. Once, twice, thrice. Finally, there was a problem. Actually, before that, the people in the village were already suspicious of the propaganda of the Gray Coat Army. This was because the few members of the Gray Coat Army that Han Luo brought back did not help the poor as advertised. Instead, they caused a lot of trouble in the village. At that time, Han Luo also felt that he had been cheated. But he felt that it was not the Gray Coat Army that had cheated him, but his brother Han Luo. The two of them started to quarrel. Han Luo said that Han Luo did not join the Gray Coat Army, and that the people he brought back were not from the Gray Coat Army. He accused Han Luo of lying to the entire village. Han Luo did not admit it. He scolded Han Luo for being reluctant to part with the food and not supporting the Gray Coat Army. It was in the evening. I was sitting here smoking. I remember that the sunset was very beautiful that day. It was as red as blood. Then suddenly, people outside started to shout that someone had been killed. The thin old man's voice was trembling. He touched the cold steps beside him with one hand. The pipe in his other hand was also trembling, and he was choking with sobs. Han Luo killed his brother. It was said that when they were quarreling, the two of them started a fight. Han Luo could not beat Han Luo in a fight, so he touched a knife. By the time I got there, Han Luo's head had already fallen off. There was blood all over the ground. It was very red, even redder than the sunset that evening. Cough, cough. Looking at the thin old man's trembling body, Tang In and Lan Sha looked at each other. They thought of the dried heads hanging on the flagpoles outside the village, and both of them were silent. They had indeed seen scenes that were 10 times, 100 times worse than this, but so what? Once they were in the same situation, they could empathize with it. Every bit of misery was enough to make one's heart bleed. Perhaps it was because he had been sad many times, but after a while, the thin old man recovered on his own. At this time, the noise outside was getting closer and closer, but the thin old man did not seem to hear it. He continued. After killing Han Luo was no longer restrained, and his actions became even more excessive. He nailed a wooden pole outside the village and hung Han Luo's head on it. Then, he set the rules for the village. He said that he would come over on time every month to collect supplies. If anyone did not give, or did not give enough, then they would continue to hang their heads on that wooden pole. He paused and slowly exhaled smoke. I don't know if it was the Gray Coat Army who lied to us, or Han Luo who lied to us. I don't want to know. I'm just thinking What did I do wrong in my life to make God punish me like this, to make the devil value me so much? Look, Han Luo was honest and loyal, filial to his elders, helping his neighbors, and was born with a good heart. He wanted to join the Gray Coat Army and help more poor people, but he couldn't. Han Luo was arrogant since he was young and ran amok in the village. Now, he bullied the villagers and killed his brother with his own hands. This kind of person actually joined the Gray Coat Army so easily. Ha! The skinny old man smiled inexplicably. He raised his pipe and knocked it on the steps, causing black ashes to fall down. Then he raised his turbid old eyes and looked at the floating head on the flagpole outside the village. His lips moved, and after a while, he shook his head and sighed. So, in the world of the devil, there are no probabilities, the story ended. Perhaps this last sentence was the old man's reflection of the various actions of his two sons, in addition to his life's experience and comprehension. It had nothing to do with others. But when these words fell into Tang Un's ears, it was like a sudden clap of thunder and lightning. His body suddenly trembled, and he repeatedly muttered to himself, "In the world of the devil, there are no probabilities. In the world of the devil, there are no probabilities." For some reason, Tang In felt that this sentence was very familiar. As he repeated it, he was entranced. In the world of the devil, there were no probabilities, and there was no need for probabilities. Because the devil had no likes and dislikes, no sadness, and no emotions. He chose you because you were you. It had nothing to do with status, gender, age, or age. It had nothing to do with personality, good or bad, loyalty or treachery. It had nothing to do with status, wealth, or status. It was like throwing a dice, casually throwing it, and whichever point it landed on would be that point. It was that simple. That was all. Tang In. Tang In. After listening to the story and understanding the gist of it, Lan Sha vaguely had a plan to annihilate Han Luo and his group. This was not because of a sense of justice. Lan Sha was from the northern wilderness. Even if she had a sense of justice, there was no need to cast it on this old brand. She just felt that this story was a little tragic. The old man was a little pitiful, and Han Luo, who killed his own brothers, deserved to be killed. With this thought in mind, she turned to discuss with Tang In. However, she saw that Tang In was sitting on the steps in a daze. He kept repeating something in his mouth, as if he had gone crazy. He did not respond, even after shouting a few times. Frowning, she raised her hand and was about to pat Tang In's shoulder. But at this moment, suddenly, "Little girl, stop!" Bamitu, who had been hiding since he entered the brand, suddenly appeared behind Lan Sha. He looked at Tang In up and down, his eyes filled with admiration. He shook his head and smacked his lips. "This kid has an epiphany and is breaking through. Don't disturb him. TSK, he's really lucky." Epiphany, breaking through. Lan Sha was stunned when she heard this. Then, she looked at Tang In curiously. However, because she did not know any martial arts, she could not see anything special about Tang, and no matter how she looked at him. After she shook her head and gave up, she thought about what actions or words just now that contained a special magic that could make people have an epiphany. Who are you?" After the skinny old man calmed down, he did not notice anything unusual about Tang In. Instead, he saw Bamitu, who suddenly appeared in his house, and was shocked. He thought that if Bamitu had not concealed it a little, the old man would have fainted because of the sudden appearance of a barbarian in his house. Bamitu ignored him and continued to look at Tang Un. Unconsciously, he frowned. When Lan Sha saw this, she was about to open her mouth and make up another lie to fool them. But suddenly, "Hey, something's wrong. What is this kid breaking through?" Lan Sha looked up in surprise and saw Bamitu staring at Tang, and who was sitting cross-legged in front of him as if he was possessed. Bamitu's face was full of shock, as if he had seen a ghost in broad daylight. Lan Sha subconsciously turned his head and looked at Tang Un. He was also stunned. Tang Un was still the same old Tang Un. He was sitting upright and muttering to himself. However, his eyes were slightly closed. But somehow, in Lan Sha's eyes, Tang Yin's figure was close and within reach. But it seemed a little unreal and vague. It seemed as if there was a layer of crystal glass between them. It also seemed as if Tang Yin was sitting in the ripples of water. He could not see clearly. Whoosh! The wind blew, and it became even more blurred. After all, Lan Sha did not know any martial arts. Although he could see the abnormality, he could not see anything. However, in Bamitu's eyes, Tang Yin's figure was very clear. It was not blurring, but gradually integrating. It integrated into the steps below, into the courtyard, into the cold wind, and even into the sky and earth. Unknowingly, Bamitu's burly body began to tremble slightly. He did not know what Twain was breaking through. He only felt that he was looking at a piece of heaven and earth, watching the rotation of the sun and moon and the change of the four seasons. He could feel the frightening power of heaven and earth. He could sense the threat and smell the danger. In an instant, he clenched his fist and took a step forward. Bamitu's clothes suddenly fluttered wildly. "Grandpa Bamitu, what are you trying to do?" Lan Sha, who sensed that something was wrong, stood between Tang Yin and Bamitu and asked with a frown, "Get out of the way, girl." Bamitu's face was solemn. "This kid is a scourge. He can't be left alive." If Bamitu had only been envious of Tang Yin's luck when he saw him break through after an epiphany, then he was now a threat. This was not to say that Twain would be able to immediately join the ranks of Wooding and be a match for Bamitu once he had an epiphany. It was because Bamitu had seen the threat in advance. He knew that if there were no accidents, the kid in front of him would surpass him in strength in the future. To put it bluntly, there were two reasons why Bamitu wanted to destroy Tang Yin. First, Tang Yin was too young and youth was capital. Second, Tang Yin was from Bran. He was destined to be an enemy of the northern wilderness. Therefore, Bamitu naturally could not sit by and watch another Bran god of sword rise, or even a Bran who might be even more terrifying than god of sword Wuding. Shaking his head, Lan Sha understood Bamitu's meaning. However, after a slight hesitation, he still shook his head. "Grandpa Bamitu, his relationship with the Bran is terrible. It's impossible for him to help the Bran fight against us. His relationship with us is terrible too. He's on good terms with me. But he from the Bran after all. He's a member of the Grey Coat Army. Your Highness, don't forget your identity." "I insist on my identity as your Highness. Grandpa Bamitu, I insist on it." "You?" Bamitu looked at Lan Sha, who was standing still and bowing with her hand on her left chest. He clenched his fist, which was covered in black gas, trembled violently, but he was unable to swing it. In the end, he took a deep breath and softened his tone. "Girl, trust me. Step aside, or else you'll definitely regret this decision in the future. No one can say for sure what will happen in the future, right? Grandpa Bamitu, I just don't want to regret it now." In terms of eloquence, even 10 Bamitu together would not be Lan Sha's opponent. After being blocked, Bamitu opened his mouth anxiously, then opened it again. Finally, he managed to squeeze out a sentence. "You're playing with fire. Girl, I admit it, but opportunity and danger always go hand in hand. Maybe," turning her head to look at Twain, who was sitting on the ground, Lan Sha's eyes flashed with a strange light. She lowered her eyelids and said in a low voice, "Maybe I can bring a great help to the tribe." Bamitu was stunned when he heard this. He looked at Lan Sha, who had lowered his head and was silent, and then looked at Tang Yin, who was sitting in a daze. He was stunned and put down his fist. His face was full of bitterness. "I knew it. I should have known it would be like this. You mother and daughter Thank you, Grandpa Bamitu." Lan Sha smiled when she saw this. She stepped forward and hugged the arm of the sighing Bamitu, acting cute. Bamitu shook his head helplessly. "Don't be in a hurry to thank me, girl, and don't let me regret my decision today." "I won't. Look at my mother. Do you regret your decision to bring her to the Bran? Let's not talk about other things for now. That Z has not attacked us for more than 10 years, isn't it? You've done a good deed. What kind of twisted logic is that? How can you say that about your own mother?" Bamutu could not help but laugh bitterly when he heard that. Then he looked at Twain and curled his lips. And your taste is far worse than your mother's. This kid's looks are, so King shabby. Well, what are you talking about? The conversation between Lon Shah and Bamutu just now was too fast, and there were some vague words in between. The skinny old man, who had almost never left the farm in his life, naturally did not understand. He stood aside for a while, and then he had time to interrupt. Lon Shah waved his hand and was about to answer, but Bamutu looked up at the door. With a bang, the closed wooden door was kicked open from the outside. Half a sack was thrown in, and a shrill voice sounded. Old thing, didn't I tell you before? Who told you to put things at the door? Are you trying to slap me in the face and cut off all ties with me? If that's the case, let me tell you, this is not enough. Hey, you are. Haha, where did this beauty come from? P.S. I'm a little emotional. Nonsense doesn't count. In the world of demons, there are no probabilities. I don't know where this sentence came from, but I felt a little emotional and thought of my sister. She was so young, beautiful, and successful in her career. She even helped pay off most of the family's debts, and she just got married. It seemed that everything was good, and she was getting closer to a better life. But now she has cancer. Phew! In the world of demons, there are no probabilities. Chapter 1004. Haha, where did this beauty come from? Amidst the ear-piercing noise, a skinny young man with a long saber strapped to his waist and a horsewhip in his hand stepped into the house. As soon as he entered, his rat-like eyes stared straight at Lon Shah's delicate face, his face full of surprise and greed. It was no wonder that the young man was so unbearable. With Lon Shah's appearance and temperament, whether in the northern wilderness or the brand, she was an absolute beauty. It was not an exaggeration to say that from a certain point of view, Lon Shah was a perfect combination of the beauty standards of the two countries. The delicate facial features of the women of the brand, coupled with the tall figure of the women of the northern wilderness, she was like a porcelain painting. What's more, this was an isolated farm. The young man, who had only seen village girls and had not seen much of the world, was naturally shocked at first sight. Hearing this, Lon Shah looked up and sized up the young man. He roughly judged that this should be Han Luo, the unfilial son that the skinny old man spoke of. He withdrew his gaze and continued to look at Tang Yin, ignoring him. It was not that he did not notice the young man's expression and gaze, but the gap between the two sides was too big. He did not even have to be angry or disgusted. However, Bamutu's gaze turned cold. He was about to wave his hand to dismiss the reckless young man when the skinny old man rushed up and roared with a trembling voice. Unfilial son, who allowed you to enter this house? Get out of here. The young man, Han Luo, did not care about his father's roar at all, or perhaps he did not hear it. He looked straight at Lon Shah and stepped forward. Then, ouch, he lost his voice and exclaimed. He was too engrossed in looking and stepped on a vegetable ball that rolled out of the sack. With a bang, he fell on his back. Han Luo did not feel pain when he got up from the ground. He only felt that he had lost face. He laughed a few times and muttered that the ground was slippery. Then he rubbed his hands and stepped forward again. Huh, what's the name of this beauty? Where did you come from? How did you appear in my house? Come, tell me. Your house? You killed your big brother. You get lost. Panting heavily, his chest heaving up and down, the skinny old man was so angry that his face turned red. He blocked Han Luo's line of sight and swung his pipe at Han Luo's head. He couldn't see Lon Shah, but he did see a pipe flying towards him. Han Luo's reaction was quick, and he hurriedly retreated. His expression was impatient as he cursed loudly. Old bastard, you mother of asterisk cur. He seemed to have realized that his cursing had dragged him into it. He immediately stopped, and then saw the pipe flying towards him again. He hurriedly protected his head, and a fierce light flashed in his eyes. Old bastard, I think you're tired of living. You still want to fight with me? Scram. Finding an opening, he suddenly stretched out his hand and pushed. The skinny old man immediately staggered back, swaying as if he was about to fall. Upon seeing this, Lan Sha frowned and hurriedly stepped forward to support the skinny old man. "Uncle, are you all right?" "Unfilial son, unfilial son." The skinny old man looked up at the sky, tears streaming down his face. He must be regretting his doting back then, not letting the dead Han's son discipline this useless young son of his. He waved his hand irritably. "Old bastard, you're so annoying, so annoying. Unfilial son, unfilial son. Everything about your big brother is good, right? If you continue to be long-winded with me, I'll send you down to see him right now." After threatening for a while, Han Luo looked at Lan Sha, and his expression immediately changed. He once again laughed cheerfully. "Beauty, you still haven't answered my question? But that's not important. Let me introduce myself first. I'm called Han Luo from the Gray Coat Army. Have you heard of the Gray Coat Army? It's a team that specializes in helping us commoners. It has a good reputation, huh?" Perhaps he wanted to show off his own merits. Han Luo immediately introduced the Gray Coat Army's good reputation. Of course, he also introduced how highly regarded he was in the Gray Coat Army, how brave he was in battle, and so on. He praised himself to the heavens and the earth. It was very mushy. Seeing this, Bamatu also laughed and shook his head. "Ha, this kind of despicable person is only in the brand." After saying this, he did not want to continue watching this farce and wave his hand to send Han Luo flying. But at this moment, suddenly, an emotionless voice sounded out of nowhere. "Does he deserve to die?" Awake? Lan Sha and Bamatu were stunned when they heard this. They subconsciously looked at the stairs beside them. There, Tangan was still sitting upright, but his slightly closed eyes had opened at some point. His black and white eyes were deep and distant. He looked at the skinny old man in a daze and asked again, "Do you think he deserves to die? Unfilial son, deserves to die good. Then go over and kill him." Tangan's expression was calm and casual as he took out a dagger and handed it to the skinny old man. Kill him, kill him." The skinny old man stared fixedly at the black dagger, as if he was possessed. He murmured several times in a low voice. Then, without needing Lan Sha's support, he grabbed the black dagger and stood up straight in a strange manner. He seemed to be extremely vigorous. "Haha, looks like you're really tired of living. Fine, I'll fulfill your wish." Seeing the skinny old man holding the dagger and walking over step by step, Han Luo laughed sinisterly and looked at Tang in fiercely. "And you, after killing the old man, you'll be next." After saying this, he reached out to pull out the dagger. But the next moment, what's going on? My hand. Han Luo's expression suddenly froze. He felt as if his hands were firmly tied by a rope and could not move. Shocked, he wanted to lower his head to check, but he found that his neck had also become extremely stiff. Then his body, waist, legs, his entire body, except for his mouth and his eyes that were rolling around in panic, was not under his control. Kill him, hey. Old man, what are you doing? Stop. Don't come over. I told you to stop. Did you hear me? If you dare take another step, I was wrong. Father, I was wrong. I am Han Luo, your only son. Don't come over. I beg you, don't come over. Looking at the skinny old man getting closer and closer, Han Luo was completely panicking. Their eyes were wide open as they struggled to break free. They were either roaring or crying out in pain. But whether the content was threatening, pretending to be pitiful, or playing the family card, the skinny old man acted as if he did not hear him. He muttered to himself and walked closer step by step with the dagger. "This." Lan Sha looked on in confusion. He blinked and turned to look at Bamatu. "What kind of power is this? Magic? Divine art? Or something else?" There was no response. Bamatu was staring at Han Luo with a frown, as if he was trying to sense something. But looking at his frown, he knew that this was not going well. In fact, it was indeed so. In Bamatu's perception and sight, there were no fluctuations of power around Han Luo, including the ground under his feet. He then looked down at Tang Yin, who was sitting upright on the steps. He was just looking at him quietly with his hands spread naturally on his knees. There were no signs that he had done anything, including spiritual pressure. What kind of power was this? This was also a question that Bamitu was racking his brains over, but unlike Lan Shah, he was too embarrassed to ask. He was the strongest man in the northern wilderness. He was the only fierce man in the northern wilderness who could sacrifice multiple magical beasts. Other than Wu Ding, he was a peerless master who rarely met a match on the continent. But now, just like how he did not know what level this kid was breaking through, he also did not know what method this kid was using to trap people, of course. There were so many martial arts techniques in the world. Even with Bamitu's experience and knowledge, it was impossible for him to know all of them. But now, this was not a problem of martial arts techniques, but a problem of the power system. If it was just trapping people from a distance, Bamitu knew many ways to do it. This was not unusual, as everyone knew there were only a few types of power systems on the Caesar continent. Brand's combat, aura, and magic, the barbarians' sacrificial and divine spells, and at most the Temple of Light's mystical stuff, that was all. But no matter which one it was, Bamitu could not find a corresponding trace on Tangen's body. If he had to say, it was similar, it was a bit similar to the mysterious things of the Temple of Light. Well, just a little. There was still a big difference between the two. Although Bamitu was not completely clear about the things of the Temple of Light, he knew that the other party used the grace of the gods as the pretext. But now, this Tang in, frowning, Bamitu's eyes narrowed. He tried his best to perceive and think, and only then did he have some vague guesses. The source of Tang Un's power seemed to be the surrounding environment. No, it was heaven and earth. No, that was not right. He was not that abnormal. To be precise, it should be the heaven and earth of a certain area. In this area, he seemed to be able to turn some of the power of heaven and earth for his own use. Or was it the method of Brand warriors to absorb the fighting aura of heaven and earth for their own use? After hesitating, Bamitu still shook his head. He felt that it was not so simple. At least it was not as simple as just absorbing fighting aura. Faintly, Bamitu felt that this kind of power could no longer be called power, but something beyond power. But what was it? No one could answer Bamitu's question, and he himself did not dare to think further, because this had already broken his, and even the current understanding of the continent, completely collapsing their thinking system. Therefore, Bamitu was completely at a loss. In contrast, Lan Shah seemed very relaxed. Bamitu, who sometimes shook his head and sometimes frowned, did not get an answer, but she did not care. As the saying goes, the expert looks at the skill, while the layman looks at the excitement. In Lan Shah's view, although what Tang Yin was doing was magical, it was actually not that great. After all, wasn't it just dealing with a bastard, unfilial son who was not presentable? Not to mention Tang Yin and Bamitu. Even Lan Shah, who did not know martial arts, was very confident that he could use no less than 10 methods to defeat the opponent. Of course, Han Luo did not know what kind of terrifying methods this seemingly weak beauty had. He did not have time to think about this problem now. Looking at his old father who was already in front of him, Han Luo, who was in despair, was somewhat quick-witted. He changed from cursing and begging to shouting for help. Help! Brothers! There's a reckless villager who is resisting. Quickly come and save me. The people who came with him should be clear about Han Luo's troubles in the village. So when he came to the end of the village and walked into the house, no one came to find trouble with him. Han Luo also did not take the initiative to bring people over. After all, he should not wash his dirty linen in public. However, what he was doing now could be said to be vicious. He was afraid that his companions would not be able to react in time. So he called his old father, who raised him, a reckless villager who was resisting. This was undoubtedly to kill this skinny old man. Unfortunately, his quick-wittedness came too late. When he shouted, although there was immediately a noise outside the door, the skinny old man had already walked in front of him and raised his dagger. Kill him! Kill him! No, no, no! Put the dagger down! Old bastard, do you hear me? Put the dagger down! Otherwise, when my brothers come, they will chop you into minced meat. Don't kill me. I'm Han Luo, Han Luo. He screamed miserably. Pooh! Blood splattered everywhere. The dagger easily pierced into Han Luo's chest, completely sinking in. Immediately, perhaps because his hatred was too deep, the skinny old man pressed the dagger down on Han Luo's body. With a bang, the two fell to the ground. Crawling up, he sat on Han Luo, who was still howling miserably and could not move at all. The skinny old man raised his dagger again, his turbid old eyes unfocused. "Kill him! Kill him! Pooh!" With another sound, blood splattered again, directly drenching the two of them. Han Luo was still not dead. He was still screaming miserably, but his breathing was a little weak. Although the skinny old man's behavior was very strange from the beginning until now, as if a force had been injected into his body out of thin air. After all, he had not killed anyone. Although the two daggers had sunk into Han Luo's body at the same time, they were not fatal and would not take Han Luo's life for a while. However, this was not the end. It was just the beginning. As if awakened by this large amount of blood, the skinny old man stopped muttering incessantly. His turbid old eyes began to focus. The old hand holding the dagger also began to tremble slightly, as if he would not be able to hold it in the next moment. However, when he lowered his head, he saw Han Luo's ferocious and twisted expression. This son whom he had doted on greatly in the past, who had killed his elder brother with his own hands, suddenly tightened his grip on the dagger, raised it up, and closed his eyes. Two streams of tears instantly flowed down his face. "Die, die, die. Only when you die can you go and apologize to Hansen." Han Luo, swinging down, Pu, the power was not great, but the pitch-black dagger's sharpness was enough to easily sink into Han Luo's body. The left side of his chest, the heart, was killed in one strike. Blood sprayed out again, very, very red. It should be redder than the sunset that the old man saw. At this moment, with a bang, the half-closed wooden door was once again kicked open from the outside. A few large men holding shining long blades instantly rushed into the house, overflowing with killing intent. F*CK. Who the F*CK dares to seek death? Sweeping the scene, they saw the skinny old man leaning on Han Luo's body, both hands still holding the dagger tightly. The few large men were stunned. Uncle Han, if they should know the skinny old man, perhaps he was the one who came out of the house with Han Luo. Looking at the scene before them, they opened their mouths, but no words came out. "This is Han Luo's father? F*CK this matter. What should we do? How about we kill this old man? Is that appropriate? Where did this beauty come from?" Very obviously, not all the large men knew about the situation in Han Luo's house. And after knowing, they also felt that this matter was F***ed up. What should they do? In the underworld, they were loyal. Logically speaking, they should avenge their companions. But now that the one who killed their companions was their companion's father, it would feel even more F***ed up to take revenge. Fortunately, they did not hesitate for too long. After looking up and seeing Lan Sha, the few large men's attention was instantly diverted. At this time, Tang In stood up from the steps, looked at the few large men, and said flatly again, "Do they deserve to die?" "Yes." Looking at the few large men who were almost drooling, Lan Sha frowned slightly and nodded decisively. "Then they deserve to die." Tang In also nodded. With a wave of his right hand, a blood-red dagger appeared in his palm out of thin air, and he walked toward the few large men. Immediately, a very similar scene as before played out again. The slight difference was that in the face of these large men who could not move and had no ability to resist, compared to the skinny old man, Tang In's attack was much simpler. As he passed by, he slit their throats with his dagger. There was no need to look back, and there was no need to waste a second strike. It was very easy. After taking down these large men, Tang In seemed to have noticed something. Instead of stopping, he stepped out of the door. Bamatu and Lan Sha did not follow, and they did not need to do so. They jumped on the wall and watched Tang In walk unhurriedly toward the large men who were roaring and rushing toward him with a single dagger. As soon as he entered the range of about 3 feet, the grumpy large men's expressions and movements, as well as a few wild horses, were all instantly frozen into stone statues of different shapes. brushing past them, waving his dagger, and cutting their throats. This series of movements was as smooth as flowing water and definitely not fast. But even with such slow movements, none of the enemies could dodge, and no one could dodge. After all, have you ever seen a statue that could run? Silently watching Tang kill all the way from the end of the manor to the middle of the manor, Bamitu withdrew his gaze and let out a long breath of foul air that had been suppressed in his chest for a long time. With a somewhat relieved expression, he muttered to himself, Fortunately, the range of control is not large now, what? Lan Sha did not hear clearly. Nothing. Well, girl, I suddenly realized that your eyesight is actually not worse than your mother's. Hearing this, Lan Sha was stunned. He pushed the frame of his glasses and turned his head to look at Bamitu's serious expression. He helplessly smacked his lips. Grandpa Bamitu, you're teasing me again. Haha, you don't understand. Knowing that Lan Sha did not understand martial arts, Bamitu shook his head and smiled, and did not explain further. He sighed in his heart and thought resentfully, I'm actually willing to tease you. But looking at the current situation, with time, the terrifying deterrence of this abnormal person would not be any worse than the brand god of wars. All right, I don't understand. But I know that if I let him continue killing like this, none of these bandits will be left alive. Looking at Tang In, who was relentlessly following behind the fleeing bandits, Lan Sha curled his lips and said, I'll have to trouble you, Grandpa Bamitu. Catch a bandit and ask him where the Gray Coat Army is stationed. Since they dared to come out and cheat under the banner of the Gray Coat Army, it's impossible that they don't have any information at all. All right, while you're at it, ask them where their stronghold is and make a trip there. After all, we have to eat here. We can't just do nothing. All right. Chapter 1005. When Tang In woke up, Lan Sha was walking around the stove with her sleeves rolled up. However, it was clear that she was not very good at cooking, especially when it came to these brand kitchen utensils. After hesitating for a long time with the kitchen knife, she finally wisely chose to give it up. She picked up some firewood and directly set up a barbecue rack in the courtyard. Staring blankly at Lan Sha for a while, Tang In obviously had not returned to reality. In fact, it was exactly so. Although he had opened his eyes and seemed to be awake, his mind was subconsciously recalling the terrifying state of being like a god or a demon just now. It was a very strange feeling. In fact, when he asked the skinny old man whether Han Luo deserved to die, Tang In had already regained consciousness. However, this kind of consciousness was not completely Tang In's. More accurately, there were some other things that were affecting Tang In's consciousness. It gave him a kind of supreme idea of overlooking all living beings like a god, like a demon, and like heaven and earth. Within the range of control, he felt that he could control everything at will. Vegetation, livestock, light, air. He could even decide someone's life and death. Of course, this was just an illusion. Tang In had not reached that kind of abnormal level yet, but he could still imprison the weak creatures that stepped into the area under his control. To be more specific, with just a thought, the target had to obey the order to stop. To make an inappropriate analogy, it was like an emperor in ancient times. Wherever he went, the subjects had to kneel and greet him. There was no reason, and there was no need for reason. They just had to obey the order. Then, with a faint explosion of thunder in the distance, Tang In's body shook, and he completely woke up. He subconsciously looked up at the western sky outside the house. That was the direction of the loud sound, and he could faintly see the rolling hills. The sun was bleak, the sky was dark, and the weather was not very good. However, this earth-shattering sound like a beast's roar was, of course, not a real thunder, but, Grandpa Bamitu is quite efficient. I've paid for the meal. She also raised her head to look at the mountains in the west. Thinking that the farm would return to its former tranquility after the bandit gang was eliminated, Lan Sha's mood instantly improved. She hummed softly as she twirled the meat in her hand. Immediately, she sensed something and turned her head to look at the inner room. Coincidentally, her gaze met with Tang In's. Slightly taken aback, he raised 3 fingers and asked, "How many fingers is this?" 3 is also an okay sign. Okay? What's that? Nothing. Suddenly thinking of something, Tang In grinned and nodded to Lan Sha, who had a puzzled look on his face. "Wait, maybe I'm still sleepy. Let me calm down." As soon as he finished speaking, he closed his eyes and exclaimed in his heart, "Killer system." Shwa! The scene instantly changed. As soon as Pooh stepped into the space, Tang Un's expression immediately froze. He didn't even hear the system's synthetic voice that reminded him of a single-digit increase in blood qi. It was bustling with activity. What appeared in front of him was a bustling street. The pedestrians beside him were rushing to and fro. They all had yellow skin, black eyes, and wore all kinds of fashionable clothes. Next to his ears was the soft language of a certain economic center in the south. Looking up, the traffic lights at the crossroads not far away were flickering, driving the flow of people and cars forward in an orderly manner. Further away, the signboard of an electronics store hanging on a tall building came into view clearly and familiarly. Everything made Tang In, who was wearing a long black robe, seem so out of place. However, this didn't diminish the sense of familiarity and intimacy that came from the bottom of his heart. It's been a long time, Tang In was only slightly startled before he instantly came back to his senses. Then, he sighed softly in his heart. He opened his arms and took a deep breath, as if he wanted to embrace something in the air. Paused for a while, he shook his head. He knew that this was just an illusion, including the sense of intimacy. He glanced at the old butler who was sitting on a bench not far away, calmly reading a book. He grinned slightly and secretly despised the old butler's boring and bad taste. "TCH, I know you're not an intelligent NPC, but you don't have to scare me like this." In fact, Tang In had always been curious about the old butler's true identity. However, the old butler didn't want to talk about it, so he didn't ask about it in detail. If he was forced into a corner, the old butler would at most say, "This is not something you can know now." Of course, Tang In had some vague guesses. He knew that the old butler wasn't a virtual NPC, and that he knew a lot about the real world. He should have come from the same place as him. Other than that, there was nothing else he knew. After all, if the old butler didn't want to talk about it, Tang In couldn't force a confession out of him. In fact, if he hadn't suddenly seen this extremely familiar scene in the real world, Tang In basically wouldn't have thought of this question now. This was because as his strength increased, there were fewer ways in which the system space could help Tang In. Therefore, the number of times he came to the system space naturally decreased. Over time, his curiosity faded. Of course, now wasn't the time to think about this problem. After thinking about it for a while, Tang In waved his hand to open the assassin panel, dragged directly to the column of killing techniques, and looked at it intently. Frenzied feast, beginner state. Under the rules in the devil's world, there is no probability. That's right. The reason why Tang In felt that the skinny old man's words were familiar was because of this. Regarding this skill, Tang In had been quite envious ever since it appeared. However, the falling flowers were intentional, but the flowing water was heartless. No matter how sincerely Tang In tried to understand and probe, this skill was arrogant and ignored completely like a queen. It wasn't that he hadn't pestered the old butler, but after that demonstration, the old butler also became arrogant. Other than letting Tang In understand the profound meaning of the rules, the old butler also became arrogant. No matter how Tang In tried to get information out of it, it just didn't fall for it. It just pretended that he didn't hear it, wasting his hot-blooded flattery. Up until now, Tang In had practiced instantaneous permathaw, which came out together with this skill to the proficient stage, but it still didn't respond. To be honest, Tang In was a little disheartened and gave up. However, who would have thought that an unintentionally planted willow would yield shade? In this inconspicuous small farm, Tang In got an epiphany and broke through in one fell swoop from the mouth of the old Bran, who was half buried in the ground. Really, fate makes fools of people. Thinking about this with emotion, Tang In stopped shaking his head and laughing. He grinned again and walked to the old butler expressionlessly. He took down the book and said stiffly, "I think you need to give me an explanation." There was no anger, no surprise. The old butler folded the page mark and put it on the bench at the side. Only then did he look up at Tang and calmly. "Pretend. Keep pretending. Let's see how you're going to fool me this time." Pointing at the frenzied fee skill introduction on the assassin panel, Tang Un's anger rose. He was flustered and exasperated. "What did you say at that time? If I want to understand this skill, I only need to understand the first half of the sentence and know the profound meaning of the rules." Damn, I actually foolishly believed it. I didn't get anything for half a year. As a result, when the old man said the second half of the sentence, I immediately understood. Do you dare to say that you're not joking with me? Previously, when he saw this specious description of the skill, under the rules, in the world of the devil, there is no probability. The old butler did say that if he wanted to understand this skill, he only needed to read the first half of the sentence and know the profound meaning of the rules. But now, Tang had made a breakthrough because of the latter half of the sentence. How could this not make him angry? So for the past 6 months, I have been thinking hard like an idiot, and I have almost broken my head from thinking too much. I have gone astray. I am not as useful as an old man's lament. Damn it. I can't tolerate this. The more he thought about it, the angrier he got. He directly said, "Old butler, I'm telling you, I'll leave it here today. If you don't give me an explanation, I'll..." After thinking about it, Tang was a little dumbfounded because he found that he couldn't threaten the old butler in the space. And taking a step back, even if this was the real world, it was obvious who was threatening, of course, since the old butler had said so. Tang had to hold on. He hammered his palm. "I'll come in every day and chat with you. I'll annoy you to death." He did not know if it was because the threat was too strong, or because he had finished watching Twain's one-man show, but the old butler opened his mouth and said in a calm and indifferent tone, "You just heard a story, so listen to another fable. Two young people wanted to climb the mountain, but when they reached the foot of the mountain, they found that there were 2 roads. One was rugged and narrow, and the other was wide and flat. They didn't know which one would lead them to the top of the mountain. Fortunately, at this time, a woodcutter came down from the mountain. The woodcutter straightforwardly pointed to the flat and wide road and told them that this was the road that would lead them to the top of the mountain in the shortest time. The woodcutter was telling the truth. One of the young people believed him and walked up the mountain. The other young man didn't believe him and walked into the rugged and narrow road. In the end, the person who walked on the flat and wide road didn't reach the top of the mountain because he was too stupid and lazy. The person who walked on the rugged road cut through the thorns and went through a lot of hardships. In the end, he was lucky enough to reach the top of the mountain by accident. And then, looking at the old butler who picked up the book again, Tang asked in confusion, "Shouldn't there be a conclusion? And there's something wrong with your fable. In the end, shouldn't the person who walked on the flat road reach the top of the mountain, and the suspicious person is trapped halfway? That's the end. If you must know what happened next." The old butler didn't even raise his head. After the young man who reached the top of the mountain went down the mountain, he laughed at his companion who walked on the flat road and found the woodcutter. He angrily asked the woodcutter why he pointed out the wrong road to deceive them. "Were you trying to say..." Suddenly, Tang paused and understood. His whole face looked like it was buried in a jar of chili. His expression changed like the wind and the clouds, and it was burning hot. Obviously, the woodcutter represented the old butler. The 2 young people were actually talking about the same person, which was Tang. The woodcutter pointed out the right path. Just as the old butler told Tang before, starting from the profound rules was a shortcut to understanding the slaughter feast skill. The 2 young people went on their separate paths. The person who walked on the flat road should have easily reached the top of the mountain, but because he was too stupid and lazy, he couldn't reach his destination in the end. This represented the Tang from before today. It was also the old butler mocking him for his poor ability to comprehend things. He had taken a shortcut into a dead end, and the young man who walked on the rugged road couldn't, or rather, it was very difficult to reach the top of the mountain. But because of a stroke of luck, they managed to arrive here by accident. This was just like Tang Yin, who heard the skinny old man's sigh not long ago, comprehending the skill with great luck. As for the follow-up, the young man who stepped on dog poop asked the woodcutter why he lied to them. Tang and lowered his head and looked at his outstretched finger. Then, he looked at the old butler, who was calm and collected. He bent his finger and instantly retracted it. He touched his nose while he was at it. Ha! Ha! Well, today's weather is good. It's quite suitable for studying. Well, I won't disturb you anymore. Take your time, ha! What a slap in the face, Dodge. In the real world, when he opened his eyes, a black shadow suddenly shrouded his eyes. His body leaned back instantly. Damn, what are you doing? With one hand on his forehead, Lan Sha put the other hand in front of Tang Yin's eyes. He withdrew his hand and said matter-of-factly, "The meat is roasted. I called you a few times, but you didn't respond. I was almost done eating, but you were still sleeping. I thought you were acting up again. What are you talking about?" I said I'm fine. Where did you go? I helped him into the house to sleep. The mental stimulation was too great. Pause for a while. Lan Sha shook his head. If nothing unexpected happens, he won't live for long. This wasn't Lan Sha cursing, but an objective fact. Even though he knew that the other party deserved to die, he definitely wouldn't feel good about killing his own child with his own hands. Moreover, it was indeed difficult for a lonely old man to survive without care. Nodding, Tang Yin didn't say anything. He just made a mental note of this place and decided that after returning to the Gray Coat Army's encampment, he would let the group of people in the military logistics who were responsible for soldiers' families include this old man and let him enjoy the treatment of a martyr's family. As for the soldier who was sacrificed, of course, it was Hansen. Okay, come and try my cooking. As long as one was from the northern wilderness, they knew how to roast meat, and their skills weren't low. Even Lan Sha, who came from a noble family, was no exception. He waved his hand and walked out of the house. Hurry up and leave after eating. I found the place. The Gray Coat Army's encampment is very close to here, only a few dozen kilometers away. It's just that Blank's army is in the middle. Think of a way to solve this. Tang Yin nodded to show that he understood. Then he saw Lan Sha walk out of the house and was stunned. Where are you going? Next door to wash up and dress up. Dress up? Of course, I'm a guest. Do you want me to appear in front of your friend dirty? By the way, Lan Sha walked to the door and thought of something. He turned around and asked, "What did you put the cloth rope from before?" "I lost it. What do you want that for?" "Forget it. I'll find another one. Please, we're going to break through Blank's army later. What if you accidentally lose me in the chaos?" Lan Sha's voice came from outside the wall. How is that possible? Besides, Elderba is watching. Even if I lose you, you'll be fine." Shaking his head in confusion, Tang Yin only felt that Lan Sha's behavior after waking up was a little crazy. In fact, Tang Yin's feeling was right, and this was just the beginning. Then, Tang Yin tasted the pain of waiting for a woman to dress up. Lan Sha said that they should hurry up and leave after eating, but when Tang Yin finished the rest of the roast meat and drank a few cans of home-brewed malt wine, Lan Sha still didn't appear. He went next door to ask, and the answer he got was that she would be fine in a while. Tang Yin wasn't sure how long Lan Sha meant in a woman's heart. He only knew that when the sun hanging above his head fell to a height visible to the eye, Lan Sha still didn't come out. Finally, when his line of sight was at a 45-degree angle with the sun, Lan Sha came out. After leaving the manor, he was bombarded with a series of questions. For example, whether his combed hair was loose, whether there was dust on his face, whether there was a problem with his clothes, etc. After dealing with it with great difficulty, less than a quarter of an hour later, Lan Sha asked again whether his hair was loose, whether there was dust on his face. Tang Yin was going crazy, really. He even began to wonder if he should enter the system space again. He would rather face the old butler's infinitely sarcastic poker face. Stop. When Lan Sha repeated the question about his appearance for the 5th time, Tang Yin finally couldn't hold it in anymore. He decisively used the killer move of changing the topic. "I forgot to discuss earlier. How should I introduce you when we arrive at the Gray Coat Army?" "Whatever, as long as you don't say that I'm from the northern wilderness." Holding the mirror borrowed from the manor, Lan Sha casually replied without turning her head. It was clear that her attention was focused on the square mirror at this moment. Then how about saying that I saved the daughter of a rich merchant from the mountain bandits on my way back? You don't have to change your name, and your appearance is more or less the same. You just have to pay attention to your temperament. In fact, Tang En's original plan was to disguise Lan Sha so that she wouldn't be so eye-catching. However, now that he saw Lan Sha competing with even a strand of her hair, Tang En thought about it and wisely dismissed this idea. However, from this unhesitant but comprehensive answer, it was clear that Tang En definitely wasn't just casually asking on the spur of the moment. However, the intelligent Lan Sha was now completely distracted. She casually raised her hand and succinctly and repeatedly replied, "Whatever." Damn! Tang En grinned and felt helpless. After hesitating for a moment, he said what he really wanted to say. Lan Sha, you know that Josiah is my lover, so I won't hide your true identity from her. This was a test. Tang En wasn't stupid. Besides, no matter which man, when he saw a woman calling his name even in her dreams, he couldn't help but think about all sorts of things, let alone Tang, and who always liked to think about things. Tang En might not completely understand Lan Sha's thoughts, but he knew that she probably had a good impression of him. However, Tang En didn't think that this good impression was strong. After all, he hadn't spent much time with Lan Sha. To be honest, this was the first time they had met since he escaped from the imperial city in the northern wilderness. It was with this idea that Tang En agreed to bring Lan Sha to the Gray Coat Army's encampment. Of course, no matter what kind of idea it was, Tang En felt that it was necessary to nip it in the bud. The reason was very simple. His true lover was in the Gray Coat Army, Josiah. However, Lan Sha turned her head inexplicably. I know. I didn't ask you to hide it from her. Just say what you need to say. Why are you looking at me like that? Is my hair messy again? Oh no. Looking at Lan Sha, who didn't seem to care, Tang En touched his nose and looked away. At the same time, he also stopped the words that had slipped out of his mouth. Tang En didn't completely believe Lan Sha's current expression. As long as the latter was in a normal state, even Tang En wouldn't be able to see any clues from his expression. However, from another point of view, if the other party really didn't have such thoughts, then wouldn't it be automatic and affectionate? Well, Tang En was conflicted. Chapter 1006. In the Gray Coat Army's main tent. It was still a group discussion, but there were more people than before. This was natural. With the retreat of the barbarian army, the Gray Coat Army's upper echelons that were divided into two groups would gather together. This was a good thing, but with more people, there would be more opinions. The meeting on the future of the Gray Coat Army had been going on for a few days, but it seemed that they still couldn't come up with a unified plan. The barbarian army has completely bypassed the Serene route and retreated to the rear. Although I don't know the reason, we can temporarily remove the barbarians from the list of enemies. So, there's only one problem now. How do we deal with Blank's army outside? Second-rate soldiers. Who cares so much? Can't we just fight them directly? You can't say that, General. We are still second-rate in their eyes. It's easy to fight them, but where do we fight from? How do we fight? When do we fight? These are all problems that need to be solved urgently. You know, our previous strategic plan is no longer suitable. In my opinion, there is no need to talk about whether it is suitable or not. I think the previous strategic plan is good. Besides, we just need to win on the battlefield. What's the use of relying on a plan? Agreed. I think we should just force our way through and let those cowards know that we didn't rely on luck to defeat the barbarian army. Generals, please reconsider. Now that the Bran and the northern wilderness are not moving, if we fight here, it is very likely that it will cause a chain reaction. Once we are caught, the Gray Coat Army will be in danger. CK. Then what do you think we should do? We can't fight, and we cannot fight. Are we supposed to practice talking with Blank's army outside every day? Aren't we having a discussion? It had to be said that the Gray Coat Army now was no longer the motley crew of tens of thousands of people and thousands of broken swords. With Rosa as the foundation and Josiah as the leader, the Gray Coat Army's internal and external military structure was gradually perfected. Every department was operating normally, and now it had the embryonic form of a proper army. Not to mention anything else, just look at the superstructure of the Gray Coat Army. The ones who were shouting the loudest were the generals and officers of the pro-war faction, while the ones who were arguing with reason were the senior civil officials of the conservative faction. Once the two sides quarreled intensely, and there were even signs of fighting, the ones who came out to mediate the conflict were the few neutral parties. Each of them had their own duties, and their positions were clear, just like a small imperial court assembly. Of course, this place was much cleaner than the Real Brand Council Hall. The good thing about new things was that there weren't so many dirty thoughts. So even though they were arguing fiercely now, the main point was the same. They were all thinking about the future of the Gray Coat Army, and not for their own personal interests. They also didn't have any king thoughts of killing the other party later. Sitting at the head of the tent were naturally Josiah, Fry, the generals of the various armies, and the veterans of the Gray Coat Army. This was the true upper echelon of the Gray Coat Army's power pyramid. Compared to the red-faced upper echelon of officers below, this place was much quieter. It wasn't that there weren't any discussions, but the way was much gentler. They exchanged opinions with each other during idle chatter. Even if they didn't agree with each other, it wasn't to the point of spitting at each other. It was very much like the refined style of important people. Of course, this situation was also caused by Fry, who now had great prestige in the army, and Josiah, who had absolute authority in the Gray Coat Army. Both of them were silent. In the eyes of everyone, the important people didn't make a decision because they had to consider all aspects and inevitably had concerns. And this was also the best time for them to express their opinions and display their talents as subordinates. But in reality, Josiah and Fry really didn't know what to say. They knew much more than the people present, and they knew that the current situation wasn't a simple problem that could be solved by fighting or being conservative. Take the Blank's army on the periphery as an example. Everyone thought that the other party was planning to sit on the mountain and watch the tigers fight. They wanted to see the Gray Coat Army and the barbarians suffer, so they were very shameless. But Josiah and Fry knew that because Tang In wanted to assassinate the barbarian commander, a certain important person in the brand had given a strict order not to attack. Therefore, the Blank's army didn't suddenly stab them in the back when they were fighting with the barbarians. It was also because of this that Josiah and Fry were very hesitant about whether to start a fight first. If now was a critical time, and they lit the fuse because they started a fight, it would directly ignite the war in the north. Then, not to mention whether the Gray Coat Army could withstand the impact, Tang In, who was sandwiched in the middle, might be in danger. Yes, no matter whether Tang In was willing to admit the fact that he was under great pressure, he was indeed the center of attention now. Lan Sha was in his hands, so the barbarian army that occupied the Brand border dared not act rashly. Wu Ding didn't receive news of his success, so the Blank's army couldn't launch a large-scale counterattack. Josiah was worried about his safety, so the Gray Coat Army couldn't break through. Such a big game of chess was in a complete stalemate. Only Tang In, the chess piece, could move freely. He really enjoyed the treatment of being the center of attention. He was happy, but people like Josiah who made decisions were in a difficult position. They were overcautious and cautious, afraid that they would accidentally choose the wrong path and step into the land of death. It could be said that they were very conflicted. The lively discussion continued, but in the eyes of Josiah, who was sitting upright, and Fry, who was rubbing between his eyebrows, this was destined to be another boring meeting that was a waste of saliva. At this moment, the curtain of the big tent moved slightly, and a middle-aged man hurriedly walked in. Everyone subconsciously glanced at him, and when they saw that it was the captain of the guards, Victor, they didn't care and continued the lively discussion. Victor also didn't care about the people present. In fact, if it wasn't for the fact that the big tent wasn't spacious and the high-ranking officers were crowded, he wouldn't have turned and would have walked straight to Josiah, although it was a little troublesome now, and he needed to walk sideways. And sometimes he had to nod in return when he met people who greeted him. It was only a few feet away, and he would arrive in half a minute. Josiah was listening to something a white-haired old man was saying at this time, nodding and smiling from time to time. He didn't notice that Victor had come to his side and was excited and anxious. Fry saw it and didn't care at first, but when he saw Victor hesitantly reach out his hand, as if he wanted to interrupt the conversation between Josiah and the old man, he couldn't help but raise his eyebrows and was slightly surprised. Josiah's identity was the leader of the Gray Coat Army, and she was also a young and beautiful woman. Therefore, no matter what the reason was, as the captain of the guards who had the most contact with Josiah, he naturally had to choose carefully. There was naturally a reason why Victor could stand out among them. In Frey's opinion, he was definitely qualified. Although his strength was a little weak, there was no problem with his way of doing things. He was steady, knew his limits, and never overstepped the rules. In fact, this was the case. It wasn't that they didn't replace Victor's voice in the beginning. There was no other reason other than that he was a man. This wasn't to say that Victor's character was bad and that everyone didn't believe him. It was just that the person who proposed this knew about the relationship between Tang, In, and Josiah, and was worried that this move would accidentally provoke the killing god, resulting in a bad result. Of course, in the end, it was Victor who successfully proved himself with his performance. In addition, whether it was Josiah or Tang In who came here before, they didn't say anything to this, so the voice gradually disappeared. And it was this person who knew his limits who actually wanted to interrupt the conversation between Josiah and the elders. Fry was interested and interrupted with a smile. "Leader, Elder High, don't just talk among yourselves. Victor is still here waiting for the report." Josiah and Elder High were stunned when they heard this. They stopped talking and looked up, only to find Victor standing on the side, rubbing his palms and waiting. Josiah smiled apologetically and asked, "What's the matter, Victor?" Victor first nodded to Elder High to express his apology, then leaned close to Josiah's ear and whispered, "Elder and I is here." He got up and cast a grateful look at Fry. The latter's action just now was undoubtedly to help him out. Fry saw this and smiled indifferently. He wanted to say something, but he was stunned when he saw Josiah from the corner of his eyes. Slight surprise, excitement, ecstasy, blame. Like a kaleidoscope, all kinds of expressions flashed across Josiah's beautiful face. It was extremely complicated, but most of them were excitement. Then he took a deep breath, pressed his hands on the edge of the table, and slowly straightened his body. Although it was a big tent erected out of thin air, the ground was specially paved with stone slabs. This was for safety reasons to prevent someone from digging a tunnel and sneaking into the tent directly. Now, as Josiah got up, the legs of the chair rubbed against the stone slabs and slowly moved back. Suddenly, there was a shrill sound that gave people goosebumps. After a few breaths, the lively debate disappeared and the tent was silent. Everyone present looked at Josiah with a stunned face. Josiah looked very calm and expressionless. Only people who were close to him, like Fry, could see the eagerness under the calmness. He simply waved his hand, meeting adjourned. After that, he signaled Fry with his eyes, left the wooden table, and hurriedly walked out of the tent without looking back. Such a rare and willful action. Not to mention everyone else, even Fry was stunned. If Victor hadn't pulled him, he wouldn't have known to get up and leave. Outside the encampment, Nelson Hong O. Twain was chatting happily with David and the others. Previously, although Lansha spoke carefully and even found a rope to tie Tang In together, as if he was afraid of being left in Brand's army. But in fact, it wasn't difficult for Tang In to break through this kind of fixed defense line in the wild when the other party was unprepared. Choosing a few cliffs and ravines that were difficult for ordinary people to reach, and knocking out a few sentries, Tang In brought Lansha and quietly broke through the blockade of Brand's army, without letting the dagger get stained with blood. Then, naturally, they ran all the way to the Gray Coat Army's camp. Originally, Tang In thought that he would encounter the Gray Coat Army's patrols, But he didn't expect to first bump into David and others who were on the lookout outside. This time, Lan Sha didn't disguise himself, but Tang In changed his appearance. He picked up the image of a middle-aged man who had experienced the vicissitudes of life from Nelson Hong last time. This was something that couldn't be helped. Although the higher-ups of the Gray Coat Army knew Tang Un's identity, they also knew that he couldn't be blamed for Rosa's death. But there were still many soldiers and civilians who still thought that Tang Un killed Rosa. This could only be slowly worn down by time. It couldn't be rushed. Of course, after bumping into David and others, Tang Un's image was exposed in advance. The one who was spying on the tree just now was you, Lazy Bear, right? Haha, your movements are still so rough. I've told you many times. This nickname isn't given to you for nothing. Since you're a bear, then you should just stay on the ground. Why do you always like to climb up the tree? Look at the bark that was bitten off by your boots, and look at the branches that were bent by your weight. Who doesn't know that someone is hiding up there? F***CK. Boss, I was the one who found you first. I didn't shoot Lazy Bear just now. Nonsense, you were standing so high up, and Boss didn't hide himself. Of course, you were the one who found me first. Boss, it's like this. Monkey is injured. Otherwise, it wouldn't be his turn to climb the tree. I feel awkward just looking at it. Ha! Tang Un had asked the few members of the Gray Space to bring back a message. It sounded like he was leaving his last words. David and others would be lying if they said that they weren't worried. But now that they met, it was no longer important. It was pointless to mention it. They laughed and joked, just like before. Tang Un was a little nervous now, looking at the familiar faces in front of him, especially the members of the Gray Space. He licked his lips and asked, Monkey is injured? Is it serious? Is everyone okay? Don't worry, boss. Monkey is fine. It's just that his thigh was pierced by an arrow. The last time I visited him, he was enjoying the treatment of the priests in the temple while teasing the little nurse. It was so good. David laughed and said, Everyone is okay. It's just that Brother Fry sacrificed an old brother, Brother Bamboo Pole. We avenged him and killed 10 barbarian officers that night. Phew. That's good, that's good. Tang Un breathed a sigh of relief. He felt much more relaxed. It was too easy to die on the battlefield. Not to mention David and others. Tang Un also left his last words when he went to assassinate Lan Sha this time. It was really hard to say what happened on the battlefield. He shook his head and said, Where's Brother Bamboo Pole's grave? Take me to pay respects to him later. Okay. David nodded and then looked at Lan Sha, who had been looking around since entering the base and was a little too beautiful for words. He asked carefully, Boss, this is... In fact, the members of the Gray Space had been secretly sizing up Lan Sha from the beginning. They weren't coveting her beauty, but trying to figure out her identity and relationship with their boss. Of course, it didn't find anything. David and others couldn't see through Lan Sha, who could act right under Tang Un's nose. It was even more impossible for them to know that she was from the northern wilderness. Oh, this is Lan Sha. Tang Un was chatting happily just now and almost forgot that he didn't come back alone. Now that he realized it, he was a little embarrassed and introduced them to each other. Lan Sha, this is David, Harry, Luke, Lazy Bear. After introducing the members of the first batch, he patted his chest and said, They're all my brothers. Lan Sha nodded and looked at David and the others. She raised an eyebrow and asked, Gray Space. You know about it? Tang Un was stunned. I've heard a little about it. Lan Sha nodded thoughtfully. She had investigated Tang Un before, so she naturally knew about the Gray Space. She bowed slightly and gave a brand salute. Hello, I'm Lan Sha. It's our first time meeting. Sorry to disturb you. Tang Un didn't tell them his real identity, but he didn't hide it either. Lan Sha also gave a brief introduction. Haha, Miss Lan Sha, you're too polite. David and the others hurriedly returned the salute and exchanged glances at the same time. They were stunned when they saw the red rope tied to Boss and Lan Sha's wrists. For a moment, they still couldn't figure out the relationship between the two. Tang Un didn't intend to explain it in detail, so they just greeted each other politely. Harry, on the other hand, was looking at Lan Sha strangely because he knew about Lena. He secretly complained and wondered if this was another love affair that boss had attracted outside. Tang had great eyesight. He hadn't noticed it before, but when he saw that everyone was looking at his wrist, he suddenly realized that the red rope hadn't been untied yet. He slapped his forehead and waved his wrist at Lan Sha. I was too excited. Throw this thing away. We're safe here. As he spoke, he reached out to untie the red rope. Lan Sha frowned slightly when he saw this. He seemed a little unhappy, but then he smiled and pointed to the front. There's so many people here. Are they here to welcome you? Tang In looked up. Weren't they here to welcome him? The one walking at the front of the crowd was Josiah. Who else could it be? Slightly behind them were Fry and Victor. Behind them were a bunch of familiar senior officials. When they were a few meters away, Fry and Tang looked at each other and smiled. They raised their cups and took the lead to stop. When he stopped, apart from Josiah, the group naturally stopped as well. Tang smiled and greeted them. This was the station, not a private space. The two naturally couldn't do anything intimate. Keeping an arm's length away, Tang looked at Josiah from head to toe. Except for a little tiredness, he didn't find any injuries. He smiled and took the lead to greet her. Wife, long time no see. Josiah pursed her lips and smiled. She pretended to casually grab a strand of hair and put on her chest. She corrected him seriously. We see each other every day, husband. In her heart, Tang smiled when he saw this. It was a very comfortable feeling. A little tacit understanding, including seeing each other every day without saying it out loud in their hearts, as well as calling each other husband and wife in an intimate code that outsiders couldn't understand. After staring at each other for a moment, Tang knew that this wasn't a suitable place. He moved his gaze away and gestured to the side. Come, let me introduce you to a friend. Lan Sha. His family runs a business group. I saved him from the bandits on the way here. Of course, this introduction was for the people not far away. Are you Miss Josiah? Looking at the stunned Josiah, Lan Sha smiled and took the initiative to greet her. I've heard about you a long time ago. The new leader of the Gray Coat Army is really amazing. She praised and reached out to tuck the hair on her forehead behind her ear. She looked elegant and natural. At the same time, the red rope tied around her wrist was particularly eye-catching against her snow-white skin. Chapter 1007. Facts proved that dramatic novels were just dramatic novels. Therefore, there were lines such as I don't care how many women you have. As long as you treat me well, comma, as powerful as you are, it's impossible for you to only have one woman. So you should let go of your love. Or two women who liked the same man at the same time. When they met, not only did they not curse and pull each other's hair, but they also looked at each other and smiled hypocritically. They chatted happily, wishing that they could immediately become sworn brothers, quickly form a united front, and discuss how to resist the next woman who joined them. All nonsense. Of course, this was not the existence of polygamy. It was undeniable that a powerful man could easily sit on a bed of flowers. To be honest, no matter which era the world was in, there were such men and women, but there were very few of them, and most of them only existed under the premise that one party was strong enough. It sounded very F***ed up, but that was the truth. Let's not talk about the distant ones for the time being. Take the flower wolf in the imperial capital as an example. If he was willing to do this, and from the fact that no victims were willing to testify in court, the probability of success was quite high. However, no matter how distinctive the characteristics of these cases were, and how far-reaching the impact was, what was certain was that it was impossible for the lines and scenes in the above dramatic novels to appear. Because in the face of love, everyone was selfish. Even those women who were as weak as vines, even if they were already in these cases and were used to it. But when they saw the so-called sisters who were showing off in front of their men, they would probably curse them as little bitches or something in their hearts. So, not to mention those women who were equally strong. For example, Josiah, who had supreme authority and prestige in the Gray Coat Army. For example, Lan Sha, who had a respected status and was even likely to become the next Northern Wilderness Empress. For example, Sylvia, who founded the new stream and was doing well in the north. Sylvia had her own pride. So after knowing about Josiah's existence, she made her position clear from the beginning and would not fight for anything. After enjoying a few days of pleasure, she simply left freely. Lansha also had her own pride. To a certain extent, her pride was even greater than Sylvia's. Therefore, not only did he not have any thoughts of retreating, but he also had the intention to face it head-on. However, this fight was not about taking advantage of the situation, nor was it about playing tricks behind the scenes to sow discord. Lansha had made her stand clear from the beginning. She raised a red string tied between her and Tang En's wrists, which was the red string. Greeting them first was similar to declaring war in an open and above-board manner. From now on, everyone would have to rely on their own abilities. If I can't do it, then I'll withdraw. If you can't do it, then don't blame me for replacing you. Concise and clear, daring to love and hate, the character of an authentic woman in the northern wilderness. However, it was clear that Lansha had made a mistake in declaring war. The custom of Hong Xian was just a saying from Tang En's hometown in the modern world, not a custom from the brand. In addition, regarding the modern world, Tang En had always said whatever came to his mind. It was impossible for him to publicize it on a large scale, so Josiah did not know the story behind the red string at all. At that time, when she saw Lansha deliberately raise her wrists, she blinked blankly and looked a little stunned. She did not understand why Tang En wanted to tie her up. Thinking about Josiah's reaction at that time, Lansha, who was arranged to stay in a separate tent in the evening, held her chin and carefully analyzed for a long time. However, she still could not figure out the slightest hint of anger from it. She could not help but shake her head and smack her lips. Tisk, no wonder he's a leader. His temperament is really good. These words were a little sour, but it was also the truth. At least in Lansha's opinion, if she was in Josiah's position and someone played this trick in front of her, even if she did not fall out with him on the spot, she would definitely not let the other party step down with dignity. It's not bad. Little girl, do you want to quit? A voice sounded out of nowhere. The space beside the table rippled slightly. Bamida stepped out of the void and naturally sat on the wooden stool. He poured himself a cup of tea. Lansha glanced at him unhappily. Grandpa Bamitu, you don't have to provoke me. This is just the beginning. How can you talk about quitting? He, not bad. This is the demeanor that a woman of the northern wilderness should have. Bamida smiled and picked up the teacup. He did not respond to Lansha's words. It could be considered as a tacit agreement to the provocation. In fact, ever since Tang En broke through at noon at the farm, if there was anyone in the world who wanted to see Tang En and Lansha together, it would be Bamitu. The reason was simple. Since he could not destroy him, this abnormal genius could only stand on his side. Under this premise, Tang En's identity as a brand was no longer important. In Bamitu's opinion, these were all minor details that could be controlled. After all, in the imperial city, there were couples of women of the northern wilderness who married Bran. From his point of view, Lansha was a little helpless now. It was true that she had a good impression of Tang En, but it was definitely not to the point where she would marry no one else but him. However, after she stood between Bamitu and Tang En in the morning, everything changed. Lansha was sure that if she said she wanted to back out now, this smiling Grandpa Bamitu in front of her would immediately rush out of the tent with a murderous look on his face and kill Tang En. After thinking about it, Lansha looked at Bamitu with a serious expression and said solemnly, "Promise me, Grandpa Bamitu, you won't interfere in the matter between me and Tang En, and you definitely won't do anything to that Josiah." Oh, Bamitu raised his white eyebrows slightly and put down the teacup without saying anything. Why? Isn't she your enemy now? She's an enemy, but she's not an enemy of life and death, and she never will be. Lansha raised her head slightly and looked confident and proud. The man that I, Lansha, I will fight for it myself. I don't want anyone to interfere, and I don't need anyone to help me. Paused for a while, looked at Bamitu, who was in a daze, and spread her hands. This is the demeanor of a woman in the northern wilderness, isn't it? She had turned the tables on him. Bamitu could not help but open his mouth when he heard this. He was a little stunned, but then he shook his head and laughed. Haha, all right, I promise you. He paused and sighed with emotion. In the end, it's just that a grown girl can't be controlled by others. The matter hasn't been settled yet, and now you're already helping an outsider. Grandpa Bamitu, haha, all right. Girl, you're thinking too much. It's not like you don't know that kid's temper. He's cruel to his enemies, and you can even say that he's brutal and bloody, but he values the people around him very much. If I make a move against Josiah, I'm afraid that he'll be at odds with our tribe for the rest of his life. Why would I do this kind of business that's obviously a loss? Lansha smiled when she heard this. She did not deny it, nor did she agree. She only smiled coquettishly and said, Haha, I'm just saying it casually. Grandpa Bamitu, please don't mind. Some things did not need to be said too clearly. It was fine as long as they understood each other. If there really came a day when Tangan stood on the opposite side of the northern wilderness tribes, not only would it be a loss, but it would also be harming others without benefiting themselves. Then, what should be done still had to be done. This was the enemy. Of course, it was still too early to talk about this. It was a precaution in advance. After speaking, Lansha immediately changed the topic. She leaned on the table and rubbed her hair in distress. She no longer looked as confident as before. Grandpa Bamitu, what I'm doing now, does it count as stealing someone's love? Is it very despicable? Why do you think so? Pursuing someone you love is such an upright thing. How can you say it's despicable? Bamitu directly shook his head and denied it without thinking. In our northern wilderness, this is called daring to love and daring to hate. He was not twisting words and forcing logic. The concept of love in the northern wilderness was indeed like that. Daring to love and daring to hate. Even snatching a bride at someone else's wedding was not particularly new in the tribe. But this is the brand, and Tangan is also from the brand. It's okay. As far as I know, Tang-in and that Josiah did not have a wedding, which means that they are not official husband and wife yet. If that's the case, of course, everyone has a chance. You can't blame anyone for snatching. Besides, even if they get married, they can get divorced. No one can guarantee that they will find the right one in a short time, right? Trust me, girl. Just do it boldly. This is not a problem. Bamitu was completely throwing caution to the wind. In order to ensure that Tang-in stayed in the northern wilderness tribes, he did not even care about his face as a peerless master. He spouted all kinds of excuses and lies without stopping. However, Lansha liked to hear this. He suddenly became spirited and clenched his fists as if he was competing with someone. That's right. As long as they are not married, I am not despicable enough to snatch them. Well, Grandpa Bamitu, please give me a basin of water. Also, if you have time, please go to the brand town tonight and buy some makeup and clothes back. All right, I want a full set of Shirley's makeup. Don't look at me like that. I know you are a peerless master, and it is not appropriate for you to run around for this, but, no problem. That's good. I will leave it to you. I will go and dress up. Didn't Josiah invite me to dinner tonight? She will feel inferior then. Ha! Well, the facts proved, once again, the war between women was quite brutal. However, even though she had prepared for a long time, when Lansha confidently accepted the invitation and stepped into the dining tent, she knew that all her preparations had been for nothing. She stepped into the dining tent and saw a flash of white. This dinner was actually a small gathering held by Josiah, Fry, David, and the others to celebrate Tangan's return. Everyone present was Tangan's friend or someone related to Tang-in. Other than that, there was not even a senior member of the Gray Coat Army. However, although it was a small gathering in name, there were quite a number of people present. There was the Gray Space, Frey's group of old brothers, Fei Barlow, who joined the battle formation later, and the officers who had been trained by Tang-in for a period of time. There were also a few long tables, and the huge tent was packed to the brim. Now, the extremely beautiful Lansha appeared at the door curtain. She took off her glasses as soon as she entered, revealing her delicate face. She lowered her head and wiped the white mist on her glasses. Fry, David, and the others were all stunned. The tent instantly became silent. Everyone liked beautiful women. Even if they knew that they had no hope, they were still pleasing to the eye. However, the gap between them was too big. Compared to Lan Shah, who was dressed to the nines and had a strong aura, the people who had been on the battlefield all day were like clowns. They sat blankly in the background, and the difference between them and Lan Shah was huge. Pause for a while. Lan Shah, you're dressed like this? Sitting inside the tent, while stirring the hot pot soup that was now very famous in the Gray Coat Army. Tang didn't know whether to laugh or cry as he sized up Lan Shah, who was dressed to the nines and dressed to the nines. He laughed speechlessly. Please, this is the Gray Coat Army, not the palace. It's not the aristocratic banquets in the city that you usually go to. You're dressed like this? Are you here to cause trouble? All right, where did you find this outfit? It's none of your business. Lan Shah glanced at the scene in the tent and knew that she had completely overdone it this time. However, she was still someone who had seen big scenes. She was only slightly stunned. She glared at Tang and put away her glasses. As she walked, she decisively tied her hair that she had been messing with for a long time into a ponytail and placed it behind her head. Then, she straightened her long dress and sat on the empty seat beside Josiah. Just a few steps away, a few simple movements were completed smoothly. When Lan Shah sat down calmly, she also restrained her goddess-like demeanor and successfully landed on the ground, becoming one with the light. Even Tang couldn't help but be amazed by her ability to quickly change her temperament and successfully blend into the surrounding environment. He thought to himself, sure enough, every woman is a qualified assassin. At least in terms of disguise, she was absolutely qualified. Immediately, the atmosphere changed. Fry and the others breathed a sigh of relief and suddenly felt much more relaxed. However, when they looked at each other, they couldn't help but feel a little ashamed. A room full of men was actually suppressed by a beautiful woman in an instant. That scene was as country bumpkins as one could imagine. Just thinking about it made them feel King embarrassed. However, the only woman in the room, Josiah, was slightly stunned. She discreetly sized up Lan Shah, who was sitting quietly on her left, and then looked at Tang on her right, who was ordering everyone to pour wine. She frowned thoughtfully. It had to be said that a woman's intuition really didn't make sense. Previously, when Lan Shah deliberately expressed her intention to declare war, Josiah didn't notice. Now that Lan Shah made a mistake in judgment and embarrassed herself, Josiah instantly became suspicious. From this point of view, Lan Shah's mistake this time could be considered a lucky hit. However, Lan Shah definitely didn't feel that happy right now. She was sulking at herself. She didn't get off to a good start. Not only did her careful preparation not attack the other party, but she also accidentally embarrassed herself in front of her competitors. It really hurt her pride. This small interlude passed as soon as the bright red hot pot soup began to boil. The atmosphere of the meal was quite good. Everyone here were Tang's friends. Even though some of their statuses had changed, such as Josiah becoming a leader and Fry becoming a future marshal, there was naturally no need to care about these things here. After a few glasses of wine, even if there was a bit of distance between them in the beginning, they quickly became good friends. Using this opportunity, Tang once again introduced Lan Shah's identity. Of course, it was still the version of the rich merchant's daughter. It wasn't that he didn't trust the people present, but Lan Shah's identity involved too many people. It was better to avoid unnecessary trouble. Moreover, her current position was really awkward. After all, the Gray Coat Army was still in a fierce battle with the Northern Wilderness Army a few days ago. Their territory was almost completely destroyed by the other party. Now, she was eating at the same table as the supreme commander of the Northern Wilderness. No matter how one looked at it, this situation seemed preposterous. Of course, Tang was just saying this. If he spread it out, it would be considered an official explanation. It didn't matter whether they believed it or not. Anyway, no one present would ask about it. For example, David and the others didn't believe it. With their experience, of course, they could see that Lan Sha's temperament just now didn't seem like a pure rich girl. But since their boss didn't say anything, they naturally wouldn't probe. Soon, the fragrance of meat, the smell of wine, and the rising white smoke. In a short moment, the lively meal officially began. As the central figure of this meal, Tang In was also the hub that connected everyone present. Of course, he was forced to drink a lot. Or rather, it wasn't forced to drink. Since they all knew each other, they had to drink a glass. If he drank a glass, he drank a glass. Even if Tang Un was a wine jar, he would still crack. However, Tang In was very smart. When he saw that the situation was not right, he argued with Fry and the others who had bad intentions. At the same time, he divided the enemy camp and pulled David and the other people from the gray space. In addition, he had trained officers and other people who were considered the younger generation. Only then did he stabilize the situation before he was forced to drink a lot. Even so, Tang In still drank a lot. Before the meal was halfway through, he only ate a few slices of meat and sat there happily and foolishly. Tang In was really happy. He liked this kind of atmosphere very much. It had been a long time since he last had this kind of atmosphere. Looking at David, Fry, and a group of acquaintances urging each other to drink, acting shamelessly, and heckling each other, he felt a warm sense of accomplishment. The Caesar continent was not his hometown. He was just a lonely stranger here. There were some things that he couldn't say and couldn't say. He could only hide them in the bottom of his heart, adding a sense of loneliness that he could never dispel in his heart. Fortunately, he now had friends like Fry, David, and a group of friends who had gone through life and death together, so he wasn't alone and carefree. This was not his hometown, but there were relatives and friends who were really worried about him here. This kind of feeling was really good, so good that it was indescribable. And with a smile, Tang In was also a little drunk. It was also because of this that Tang In, who was already in a tipsy state, didn't notice that there were undercurrents surging around him. Josiah and Lan Sha started chatting. This was also inevitable. There were only 2 women in the whole tent. The rest were a group of men. In addition, the 2 of them were sitting together now. It was inevitable that they would come into contact with each other. First, they secretly observed each other. As the host, Josiah naturally had to speak first. He smiled and asked, "Lan Sha? This surname is not common, but it's very nice." "Well, where are you from, Miss Lan Sha?" Josiah regretted it. When they first met, he didn't notice Lan Sha, who was a little too beautiful, so when he was alone with Tang In before the meal, he didn't think to ask. Now, he found that the other party was a little unfriendly, but he didn't have any information about the other party. It was like fighting a war. There was no information about the enemy. This encounter would not be easy to fight. You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.